Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we will call to order, please. Madam Deputy Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Mayor Patterson, I believe we do have a quorum, but I will wait for all members of council to have their seat and get signed in before I officially say yes.
It looks good to me.
Yes, we have quorum.
Wonderful. So first up is Committee of the Whole closed meeting.
Moved by Councillor Baum, seconded by Councillor Hill, that Council resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole closed meeting to consider the following item: personal matters about an identifiable individual, including municipal or local board employees, Chief Administrative Officer.
We will call the vote. Please vote. And that carries. And that carries. Okay, now we will ask for any disclosures of potential pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations? Yes, Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have two declarations this evening. The first is, I, Mayor Rita Holland, of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, declare my pecuniary interest in the matter of the briefing with respect to Queen's University initiatives, as I am employed by Queen's University. And the second is, I, Mayor Rita Holland, of the Council of the Corporation of the City of Kingston, declare my pecuniary interest in the matter of information report number 7 with respect to the Juniper Cafe lease update, as I share custody and property with the chair of the TEP board.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other disclosures? Yes, Deputy Mayor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. I, Peter Stroud, of the Council of the City of Kingston, declare my pecuniary interest in the matter of miscellaneous business motion 4, Bell Let's Talk flag, as I jointly own shares in Bell's parent company, BCE.
Okay, thank you very much. So, seeing no other disclosures, we will move on. We have no presentations this evening. We have no delegations, but we do have a number of briefings. First, Craig Desjardins, Director of Strategy, Innovation and Partnership, will provide introductory remarks and introduce Daniel Wolf, Principal and Vice Chancellor at Queen's University, to provide a briefing with respect to Queen's University and initiatives they have underway.
Between the city and Queen's University is growing at an incredible pace. The work involves almost every aspect of our business, from healthcare to the environment to technology and innovation, and includes faculties and departments across the university, both staff and students. Principal Wolf has been an extraordinary champion in building the strong relationship between our two organizations towards our common goal of both community and economic development, and ultimately making the lives of our citizens better. I will now invite Principal Wolf to come forward and provide a briefing with respect to Queen's University and the work underway.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much, Craig, for that introduction. Good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be back again, or here for the first time with Kingston's new City Council. And to begin, I'd like to offer my congratulations to all of you. Congratulations, Your Worship, on your re-election, and to all councillors, both re-elected and newly elected. I'm sure you've all been very, very busy in your roles and working very, very hard to serve the Kingston community. So I'd like also to offer my thanks to the past councils and senior staff with whom I've worked over the past 10 years of my principalship. I've greatly appreciated the collaboration and collegiality we have managed to build, despite a few rocky issues, one or two of which persist. Tonight, I'd like to speak briefly about the Queen's-Kingston relationship and our commitment to working together to chart the best path forward for this community. I, and indeed the entire senior administration of Queens, highly value our partnership with the city, and we want to remain steadfast partners over the next 4 years of this council and beyond. As you know, the Queens-Kingston relationship is one that is intertwined, particularly as Queens' footprint across the city has expanded beyond what was the westernmost edge of the city in 1841. We have a physical presence that touches nearly all areas. Our main campus is located in Sydenham District. West Campus is found in Portsmouth. Innovation Park lands are in Kings Court, Rideau. The Reactor Materials Testing Lab is in Loyalist, Cataraqui. And the Queen's Law Clinics and Family Health Team are downtown in Kingstown District. And Queen's students, faculty, and staff, along with their families, live across the city's urban and countryside districts. I think many residents enjoy the variety of opportunities and publicly accessible facilities that accompany an institution such as Queen's. For example, facilities such as the Isabel Bader Center for the Performing Arts, the Agnes Etherington Arts Center, the libraries, the Athletics and Rec Center, the employment opportunities, the community music program, and countless summer camps, lessons, and PA day activities for kids, and sporting events such as football and hockey games. I am, however, also aware that there are challenges and difficult conversations that we need to have to move forward on some issues. We do need to keep the communications channels open and proceed in such a manner that is respectful of all partners. And with all that said, I think in recent years, as Craig Desjardins mentioned, there have been many examples of increased cooperation and partnership between Queens and the city. One of the most recent examples is the University District Safety Initiative, on which we have joined forces to tell students and the community that unlawful behavior carries consequences. I believe that some of those summoned to the courthouse in November have done some soul searching and had serious conversations with their parents about alcohol consumption and the cost to their wallets, their academics, and their reputation. Another example of a project that gained traction during the past few years is the Kingston Immigration Partnership, which works to provide leadership in a community to attract, integrate, and retain newcomers to the region. Queens was involved in this project from day one through our staff member, Monica Stewart, and later through our commitment to report annually on institutional activities related to the partnership's strategic plan. During my tenure, I've been pleased to see the evolution of the Queens and Kingston relationship, one that encompasses a broader vision of our shared responsibility for the economic prosperity of our city and our region. And Queens will continue to solidify its role as a regional leader in talent development and in supporting entrepreneurs in Kingston. We have many opportunities further to enhance our cooperation locally. And within the broader region, I would encourage everyone to be active participants. Now, I know some of you may well be wondering about the recent news from Queen's Park about the 10% tuition cut and how that may affect our enrollment. I would say it's very early days yet, and obviously we're looking at all angles. I would say that we are subject to some limits on our growth, in particular the official corridor system on enrollment imposed by the province of Ontario, and on top of that a self-imposed cap on enrollment that is of which the limiting factor is our ability to offer a guarantee of residence to all qualified first-year students who request a residence room. We are also very sensitive to the challenges that the city is currently facing in terms of its vacancy rate. And this is of interest because we are in the midst of hiring a large number of new faculty members who will buy homes, rent condos, put their children in schools, and put down roots. We have had conversations with developers to come up with creative solutions to accommodate upper year students and others caught in the housing crunch in Kingston. and will continue to work with the city on this issue, including participating in the Central Kingston Growth and Infill Strategy Community Working Group. It's my understanding that Mayor Patterson will be forming a new housing task force to help find potential new solutions for this, and Queens will be very pleased to be included in this process. I'd also like to thank city staff for their commitment and effort in working with Queens on an annual basis for some of our significant events, such as Move-In Day, Orientation Week, and Homecoming. Over the coming months and beyond, I'd like to encourage all of you to contact Queens at any time, whether through me in my office or through our Government and Institutional Relations office. Our doors are always open. Finally, as most will be aware, my tenure as principal is coming to an end in June, and I can understand that many may be wondering about this transition and what it will mean for the university and community. And I do want to assure you that during the next several months, I will be plowing ahead with my priorities and initiatives and ensuring that we achieve results on many key areas, including student health and wellness, diversity, inclusion, and reconciliation, and of course, faculty renewal. Patrick Dean, the current president of McMaster University, will be rejoining Queens in July to succeed me as principal, and I know he looks forward to working with all of you. Patrick is no stranger to Kingston. He was vice principal academic at Queens for 5 years, overlapping with my term as principal. He is fully aware of both the issues and the opportunities that are part of the Queens and Kingston relationship. I'm absolutely confident that under his leadership, the university and its relationship with the city will be in excellent hands. Thank you, and all the best for 2019.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you. Thank you, Principal Wolf, for your presentation and for your time at Queens. I'm wondering if you could offer council your perspective on what we could do as a city to retain students. What can we do to keep the students who come to Queens in Kingston for the long term?
That is an excellent question, Councillor, and one that I think we have wrestled with at the university as much as council and many local businesses have over the time I've been principal. For example, it's a frequent subject of discussion at the Imagine Kingston Roundtable that I attend. There are many things to commend Kingston, including just a fantastic place to live and put down roots, lovely region, affordable, and so forth. What we lack is the big employers, for the most part, that they will find in Toronto or Montreal or bigger cities. That, too, I think, has actually begun to change a bit with the attraction of some recent businesses to Kingston through, I think, efforts of the city in collaboration with the university and, of course, St. Lawrence College and RMC. So I think it's continuing on down that path and indicating that it's a very good place to live, lots of great facilities to offer, but that we're also very much open for business.
Okay. Seeing no other questions. Oh, yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. You mentioned, like, it seems that you're entering rather financially complex times, shall we say. So so with first-year students, does the university have any plans for building its own residences for new first-year students?
We would need a new residence now, even if we did not actually admit any new students. We still have some students who are, double rooms, triple rooms, and so forth. So we are in the very early stages of looking to build or bringing the business case to our Board of Trustees for a new residence. So I wouldn't look for shovels in the ground this year, but there's no question that, I shouldn't say there's no question, but I would say in all likelihood, there will be a new residence built over the course of the next 2 to 3 years.
Thank you. It's appreciated.
Are there any other questions? Well, Principal Wolf, on behalf of City Council, I want to thank you for your leadership over the last 9.5 years, and We've come a long way, I think, in our relationship between the city and the university, and look forward to many great years ahead. I think you've laid the right foundation, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, so with that, we'll move to our second briefing this evening. Julie Salter-Keene, Community Projects Manager, and Kristen Mullen, Executive Director of Sustainable Kingston, will appear before Council to speak to Information Report Number 1 with respect to community indicators.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council members. For those who do not know me, I'm Julie Salter-Keene. I'm the Community Project Manager with Community Services. And with me this evening is Kristen Mullen, the Executive Director of Sustainable Kingston. So tonight we're going to share the results of a year-long community process to establish key community indicators that reflect the quality of life in the community. And as well, Sustainable Kingston will speak to being a partner in that steering committee and how they're going to champion the community indicators as we move forward. So why do we need community indicators? Community indicators provide information about the well-being of a community. They show the progress the community is making towards its vision of becoming a vibrant and prosperous place to live. Indicators are high-level, objective, and policy neutral, presenting facts and descriptions rather than explanations. By describing the what, quality indicators prompt people to question why, which can lead to improved analysis, accountability, and policy change. In Kingston, we currently have multiple lists of indicators in the community, such as within the City of Kingston, the NGOs, institutions, etc. However, there is no consistent indicator list supported by all the various stakeholders. The steering committee was established and formed in 2017, and it's a representation, as you can see from the list here, a cross-section of community organizations to help identify the indicators. The city then, in partnership with Sustainable Kingston, convened the conversation with the community partners to gather expertise and to provide guidance on the indicators that are valuable to measure for the City of Kingston. The project scope, I've just briefly go over how we got to tonight. We had phase 1, which was our research. We pulled together our steering committee, which I just discussed. Our phase 2 was the selection of the indicators. So with all the expertise from the different organizations and groups, we pulled together a preliminary group of indicators, which we then took out to a stakeholder group, which I'll show you in a moment. And we served them to see what was relevant to all these different stakeholders. We then went back, finalized those indicators, and came back to the public with another survey and a public meeting to confirm and to obtain additional information. And then we finally finalized the community indicators that we will present tonight. From here, we will prepare a communication plan working with Sustainable Kingston. We will communicate this to the public. We'll be posting on the city's website. And as we go from year to year, we will bring back a report to council with respect to the maintenance plan and how we are reporting out on each year. So as you can see, we had a number of stakeholders that we surveyed throughout the community. They were consulted, as I said, to the draft indicator list. The results were then vetted through the steering committee, and we went back again to the public and back to the steering committee for a final look and finalization of the indicators. Through the survey and through the public, we received over 103 responses and comments with respect to the indicators prior to finalizing. So how do we choose the indicators? As I've indicated, we worked with the steering committee, and we worked towards one general list of indicators that is supported and utilized by all the stakeholders in the community. It became a very difficult task at times because we wanted everybody to think, what is an indicator that is measurable, and what is an indicator that is relevant to the community at large and not to an individual stakeholder group. So here before you is the snapshot of our community indicators. It's a quality of life assessment tool that reports out on population projections or indicators. And there's 5 categories: the community context, prosperous city, healthy and green, safe and vibrant communities, and vulnerable populations. The infographic shown here today shows the most current data available. Some is from the 2016 census, while other data is sourced from the various agencies and groups within the city for either 2017 and 2018 where available. The provincial average has also been included where that was available. The snapshot will be reviewed annually and updated with available data from the previous year where that becomes available. And comparables with communities that track similar indicators will be included in our annual update. This regular checklist will illustrate how Kingston as a community is doing. Along with the infographic, we have a community indicator definition and data source document that will also be posted on our website that was included in your information report, and that will be provided on the website and updated as we provide additional information. Now, Kristen Mullen will speak to being the community partner.
Thank you. So I wanted to speak a little bit about why the community indicators are valuable to community organizations such as Sustainable Kingston. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Sustainable Kingston, we are a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to increasing sustainability and resiliency of Kingston through programs and information sharing. So in 2016, Sustainable Kingston developed 6 priority areas. They include sustainable transportation, economic prosperity, climate action, sense of community, environmental stewardship, and food security. They were developed through a close consultation with the community, lots of research, and also were developed to progress towards the objectives of the Sustainable Kingston Plan. So as you can tell, a lot of the priority areas correlate to the community indicators, and I just wanted to highlight some of them that correlate very specifically to Sustainable Kingston programs. For example, if you look at the waste diversion metric, Sustainable Kingston in the fall of 2018 partnered with the Solid Waste Division of the City of Kingston, and we are now providing presentations in elementary schools for JK to grade 8 students on how they can reuse, reduce, and recycle, mainly focusing on the recycling programs in the City of Kingston and hoping that those students will bring that information home to their families and influence the recycling patterns at home. The next one I wanted to bring up was the GHG reduction target. One of our biggest programs at Sustainable Kingston is the Green Economy Program. And we have 31 business members in Kingston that are part of that program. And together, over the last couple of years, they have reduced 21,571 tons of carbon. That's the equivalent of taking 4,619 cars off the road for the entire year. In 2019, we are hoping to triple our membership in that program, and I'd really like to see where that metric ends up in 2019. Finally, public transportation usage. So Sustainable Kingston is a champion for the Commuter Challenge. We host the Roll-In Breakfast in Market Square in 2018. The mayor was there, as well as lots of media. And just last week, we partnered with Transit for the Climate Change Symposium. Where anyone who was headed to the symposium and had their ticket to show the bus driver could get a free ride to and from the event. Let's see. So we really use the community indicators as a report card of our progress in the community. They give us a better idea of the state that our community is in. They drive communication about our community's strengths and weaknesses, and it really brings people together to discuss ways that we can take action. The information helps steer our focus at Sustainable Kingston towards areas of concern and ensures that we're on the right track. It provides us with information that validates the effectiveness of our programs, as you can see. And at Sustainable Kingston, we believe the power of having a document that allows us to compare our progress to other Ontario communities and to ourselves year over year is very valuable. We think that the community indicators are a very important part of building a healthier and more resilient community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I love this, the one-page community indicator snapshot, because that just gives so much information that's so easy to read in that one-page summary. I just wondered if, so this is the baseline for this year, and then for next year, we're going to keep collecting the stats and update it. And I wondered if for those things like the number of hectares of parkland per person where we don't have an Ontario average, if then for next year, if we could show in brackets, since we don't have an Ontario average to compare to, if we increased it or stayed the same, if there's any flexibility for that. And also for that green pillar there, if there's any room to add maybe one or two, because under community context, there's 8 indicators. Under healthy and green, there's only 6. So if we could reduce the font and add maybe the number of trees that were planted in Kingston, and, like use next year's as the baseline, and then the year after it could be, like plus 200 trees or a 5% increase, just keep track of that. Just as one example, that would be great. Just wondered what your opinion was if we could work towards that.
Through you, Your Worship. Yes, we certainly can do that. The intention of the steering committee was to reassemble each year and to ensure that the indicators that we are using are relevant, and certainly to look at adding and providing that comparison between the different indicators as well. Thank you.
Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm looking at the vulnerable populations at the top, where it says 29.3% of children 5 years of age are not developmentally prepared for their school age. Is that information coming from the school boards?
So that, through Your Worship, the information is a survey that's provided to the kindergarten teachers. And just one second. It is a comparison of 5 different categories that they're assessed on, the children as they enter kindergarten, their cognitive, their speech, etc. So that survey is completed, and then it's a province-wide.
So just to, if I may, I noticed on the group that was surveyed, you don't include the Catholic, public, or French boards in that grouping that was surveyed. I don't know if that's just not included in that list or not.
They were, through Your Worship, yes, they were included in the survey.
Thank you.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, thank you for this really excellent information displayed beautifully. I have a question about the vulnerable population section as well. The percentage of households experiencing food insecurity, 7.3%, and then we have 14.8% of the population are living in poverty. I'm just curious about how those numbers correspond based on your interactions with the group, why we are seeing lower rates of food insecurity relative to household poverty.
Through Your Worship, the information we received is through Stats Canada. You're wondering the difference between the poverty line and the food security.
Yeah, okay, that's good to know. I mean, just knowing that is enough, because so that the data is specific to Kingston from Stats Canada, or is this a national average?
So the large numbers are specific to Kingston. And
So I think the question was, well, correct me if I'm wrong, Councillor Holland, but the question was why it's 14.8% that are living in poverty, and only 7.3% that are experiencing food insecurity, thinking that those two things would be more or less strongly correlated.
Through you, the worship, the food security are specific questions. So the poverty line is specific to a dollar amount, where the food security is, have you risk food? Is it food security, or is it vulnerable to food? So those are questions that are not related to or correlate to the two different ones.
So self-reporting of
Yes.
food insecurity based on a series of questions. Got it.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Chappelle.
Very interesting presentation. Thank you very much. On the vulnerable population sector as well, one factor that I'd be interested in monitoring would be the capacity for seniors to pay to remain in their homes, so their capacity of their fixed incomes versus the amount they pay in property taxes, to know an affordability index before we start forcing these seniors out of their homes.
We will make note of that. Thank you.
Noted. Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Just a question. I see that when you're estimating the median after-tax income for individuals, was there a decision there to do that instead of having before-tax income? The reason I ask that is that's usually more relatable for more people if you have the before-tax income. It varies on what you're trying to measure. And family income, like when you report, I have no objection to putting that in. I'm just saying when you report, I would suggest, and maybe you have some thoughts on this, that it be also before tax and family income, before tax, because that's more relatable to more people, I think, when they're trying to judge just where are we at.
Through you, Your Worship. We had a very lengthy discussion on that one particular indicator. There were, from our steering committee, there was ones that wanted to do the reporting from before tax, and we, as you can see, we decided on the one after tax because the rationale was that's the money that people have left over to be able to spend in the community. So that's why we use that indicator specifically, but there was a lot of discussion around that one indicator.
Thank you. I'll still stick with my point, though.
Noted. Any other questions? Deputy Mayor Stroud.
Thank you. And I realize my father was a statistician. There's no end to the questions that are raised by a set of variables that you put in front of us, and especially when they're nice, attractive fonts. But on the very first one about demographics, and this is to many points, how many seniors do we have in Kingston? It says the percentage has increased by 29.6%, but it doesn't tell us the percentage of the population that is in that demographic. So like year over year, it'd be nice to know what percentage of our population are seniors. A fairly simple demographic. Like the relative number is there, 29.6 increase, but what are we at? We don't know. So I was wondering if there's one way you maybe combine the two in the one in the same item.
Through you, Your Worship. So this is the infographic, and we have the background document that's attached as well, which is our data and the data sources. So, and with respect to our population, we have that all posted on the website. So if we started to add all these informations onto the infographic, all of a sudden it's unreadable. So that's why we've prepared this background document that has all the information that you have asked and many others have asked this evening, where you can go right down to the details on that.
So this is like the teaser that gets you, like the front page that gets you to open and read the detail.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. I can't resist. My PhD supervisor has made his life off these type of indicators. Brian Smollett of the University of Waterloo, he has something called the Canadian Index of Wellbeing, and I think that this is right in the same vein, very good, and I'm very pleased to have this data, especially as we move into budget and strategic planning. This will set a good context for us, so congratulations, thanks for doing it. But I would commend Dr. Small to you. I didn't see him in this set of references, but yeah, he's at the University of Waterloo. And there's also another one that's very similar that could help augment this in the future called the GPI, the Genuine Progress Indicator. It's out of a think tank in Atlantic Canada, so 2 additional sources to make a great document, a touch better.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we'll move to our third and final briefing this evening. Paul McClatchy, Environment Director, Real Estate and Environmental Initiatives, will appear before Council to speak to Information Report number 2 with respect to an update on community greenhouse gas emissions, and Information Report number 3 with respect to the electric vehicle strategy update. Mr. McClatchy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and good evening. Good evening, councillors. My purpose with this briefing is to cover highlights of 2 information reports that are in your agenda, 35 and 36, both on climate action progress and an update on the city's electric vehicle strategy. There we go. So as a background on our climate action efforts to date, Kingston became a member of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partners in Climate Protection Program in 2002, and us, along with over 350 other Canadian municipalities, have used its 5 milestone framework to create our climate action plans. And with the completion of our Kingston Climate Action Plan in 2014, we had completed all 5 milestones of that PCP program. Also, with Council's endorsement of the plan, we endorsed our current greenhouse gas emission reduction targets for the community, which are 15% below 2011 levels by 2020 and 30% by 2030. As implementation of the plan proceeds, we measure our progress by completing community greenhouse gas emission inventory reports approximately every 2 years or so. And we rely upon firms that specialize in carbon accounting to do that work for us. And our latest 2017 inventory was completed by a firm called Sustainable Solutions Group out of Vancouver, and they also helped us with our 2014-2015 inventories. Now, the Partners in Climate Protection Plan program provides a protocol for greenhouse gas emission inventories, and that was followed for our inventory, of course. And the way basically we do it is we collect data from various utilities companies and from energy sales databases and other sources, and they assess that data, and then they compile it together and present it in terms of carbon footprint, like you see on the slide here, for activity sectors and for fuel sources. So, the 2017 inventory report that we have, and it's also available online at the City of Kingston's website, it's indicating a very impressive 32% reduction in total emissions for the community between 2011 and 2017. Now, obviously, there's a great temptation to celebrate reaching our reduction target some 13 years early with this. But I caution everyone that one reporting year doesn't necessarily establish a reliable trend. And when we actually dive in and examine what's contributing to the reported reductions, there are some reasons why we might want to take a cautious but optimistic approach and stay with our present course of continuing to focus on actions that reduce our emissions and continuing to monitor our progress. So some of the main factors that are contributing to the estimated emission reductions in 2017, firstly, the weather. The weather is always a consideration, and in 2017, the number of heating and cooling degree days was actually the lowest we've seen since the year 2000. So that means less energy was needed to heat and cool buildings. Also, the continued greening of Ontario's electrical supply is a contributor. Since 2011, the elimination of coal-fired generation has reduced the carbon intensity of electricity in Ontario by almost 60%. And so not only has Kingston reduced its electricity consumption, but the electricity that we do use is now much less carbon intensive. The largest factor, however, is an apparent 50% reduction in natural gas use from Kingston's industrial, commercial, and institutional sector, the so-called IC&I sector. And on the face of it, when we saw this, it seems rather improbable to see such a large decrease in natural gas use in such a short period of time. With that, we did reach out to the natural gas utilities that provided the data, and understandably for privacy reasons, they provide only energy consumption data that's aggregated over fairly large areas so that the usage patterns, energy usage patterns of individual businesses and facilities can't be pinpointed. This is a common way of doing this kind of data collection for GHG emission inventories, but this kind of geographic aggregation can introduce some errors that are very difficult for us to assess and tease out. I don't believe there's any doubt that we are seeing a strong downward trend in both natural gas use and related emissions. But with respect to that, I think we should remain cautiously optimistic, as I said before, as we continue to work with our data providers to look at verifying the accuracy and sustainability of this trend through future emission inventories. So it's good news, but we should be careful. Also, as is set out within the Kingston Climate Action Plan, there are several important initiatives that are being undertaken by the city and our municipal partners that have likely also served to influence the current emission reduction. Some of those include investment in a modernized Kingston transit system with express services, technology, outreach to students. That's generated nationally recognized increases in ridership. Our source-separated organics green bin program has diverted thousands of tons of methane-producing organic waste from landfills. We've also seen the integration and focus of infill and pedestrian-friendly development into our official plan and other planning instruments that supports compact and efficient development. We've seen completion of active transportation master plan and continued investment in pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. We've seen a large investment in electrification of transportation that we'll talk about in a minute. Seen a lot of construction of green building and renewable energy generation on city facilities. We've seen award-winning conservation and demand management programs from Utilities Kingston and Kingston Hydro that provide financial incentives for residential and commercial energy reduction projects. And as Julie and Kristen mentioned, Sustainable Kingston's Green Economy Program, with over 30 members reducing over 20,000 tons of GHG sustainably year over year so far. The last piece within the information report that I wanted to highlight was the province's proposed environment plan. The environment plan was posted to the Environmental Registry in November of 2018, and it's intended that it replaces the former Ontario Climate Change Action Plan. Now, responses on the Environmental Registry posting are due by January 28th, and staff have reviewed the environmental plan within the context of our own Climate Action Plan and other master plans, and we intend to provide some comments that support the importance of things like resourcing municipalities to continue taking climate action, building renewable energy generation, supporting programs that enable people to retrofit buildings and conserve energy, continuing with active transportation, integrating climate planning into urban planning, and adapting to the changing climate through making municipal infrastructure more resilient. We identified those issues because we didn't think they were adequately explicit within the proposed environment plan. Moving on to the second information report, the update on the Kingston electric vehicle strategy. With a mind to tackling that 37% of our community carbon footprint that's due to gasoline and diesel from the transportation sector, City Council approved an EV strategy and related budget that focuses on 3 action areas, those being the integration of electric vehicles into our light and heavy-duty municipal fleets where that's practical to do, the construction of the public electric vehicle charging network, and public promotion of electric vehicles and the charging network in Kingston. So with Council's approval of that electric vehicle strategy, we undertook a procurement that saw us select Flow Services as our equipment provider. Now, Flow is a Canadian company that constructs electric vehicle charging systems and currently provides Canada's largest EV charging network. We have completed the installation of 42 level 2 charging stations at 19 different municipal locations. And with the recent announcement by Natural Resources Canada of their funding support for Kingston, we can now proceed with the construction of the 2 proposed level 3 fast charging stations at Frontenac parking lot in Kingston's downtown. And I'm happy to say that we expect to complete the entire public charging network in 2019 with a significant capital budget surplus. And so far, the use of the charging stations has been good. We've seen over 2,100 unique charging sessions recorded at them within the first 5 months of operation in 2018. And bear in mind that not all the charging stations were active in August of 2018. They came online gradually over the course of those 5 months. So that is good use. We see that chargers in the downtown area located in places like Clarence Street, Pump House Steam Museum parking lot, Artillery Park, and in the Hanson and Chown parking garages have been the most popular. Our level 2 chargers will continue to be offered at no cost until January 2020, which is the end of the pilot program for the no charge offering of those level 2 chargers. And the common market rate for public charging in January 2020 will be applied, which is usually $1 to $2 per hour per session for those level 2 stations. And by our estimation, that will be sufficient to recover the cost of the energy that we're delivering and the maintenance of the stations. Now, the level 3 fast chargers, once they get installed, they They will require payment right from the get-go. And again, the market rate for that is $10 to $20 per hour of use because they deliver such a high rate of power and very convenient for people that are looking for that quick charge. That is all the items that I wanted to highlight out of those two reports. I apologize for whipping through it so quickly, but I get my 10 minutes. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Stroud.
First of all, in general, I love those two reports, and I love the good news that's in them. I had first off a question from the first report about that red ICI sector reduction. Did any of that simply attributable to a reduction in consumption, gross consumption by the sector, like some of the large players scaling down operations, that kind of thing?
Yes, certainly, through your worship. There's been no change in the carbon intensity of natural gas, so any reduction in emissions from natural gas is because they've used less, presumably. The devil is in that detail of trying to figure out why is there such a large reduction when we don't see a large economic downturn, we don't see mass closures of plants or facilities or anything like that. So trying to explain that reduction is difficult.
Okay, and the other one is on about second report, the electric bus, the language in there about the electric bus and the cancelled GHG grant from the province. So, and where does that leave us for the future, and do we have any options to one day get a full-size electric bus running for Kingston Transit?
Sure, thank you for that question. And I actually see our Deputy Commissioner Sheila Kidd here, and I think she'd be the most qualified one to answer that one for you.
Through you, Your Worship. So yes, we haven't completely canceled the grant that we were awarded, which was to help to partially support the purchase of electric buses into the fleet. But we were relying on another grant opportunity that was subsequently canceled. So at this point, we're on hold with that. We're monitoring what's happening in other communities because the electric bus is significantly more expensive than the traditional diesel. And we're also monitoring the reliability. So the City of Toronto is currently undergoing a large program. They're testing various models, and we thought we'd watch for that for a bit.
Okay, next on my list is Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. Great report. I know I've spoken to you in the past. People who own electric vehicles are raving about the Kingston policy. And you know what I'm about to say. The single complaint we get is that there are charging stations that are non-electric vehicles parking there, feeding the meter. Do you anticipate us being able to have a traffic and streets bylaw amendment that will make those more explicitly electric vehicle only?
So through your worship, thank you for the question. You've noticed that we have installed signage and provided information to encourage people to use the spaces as they were intended. But again, I'm going to refer back to our Deputy Commissioner, who's also in charge of parking, to give you the skinny on that.
Through you, Your Worship. Yes, we have heard of the electric vehicle users. That has been probably the complaint that they've had. And, we used the term cautiously optimistic a couple of times tonight, and that's sort of the approach that we're trying to take. The spaces that we have on street are very highly sought after, highly demand spaces in the core of the downtown. We wanted to do that so that the EV charging stations were visible and very easy to locate. But at the same time, we are still trying to manage our parking supply. We do have some pressures on the parking supply, there's no question about that, and dedicating the spaces would mean that those spaces would be underutilized compared to the total utilization that we get out of allowing anyone to use them. So right now, we've used the approach of signage and asking people nicely. We do not have a fee at this point in time or a fine that's been approved to be able to look at that. And so just being a bit careful because we've got some supply pressures, but looking probably to, if we're going to dedicate any spaces, to do so within the parking structures and not necessarily the on-street. So in a parking structure, our parking management policies encourage people who want to park for longer periods of time to do so in the lots or the parking structures, and leaving the most desirable on-street spaces for quick turnover. So that's the policy piece that we're just being a bit cautious on. So I think that we can move forward in the early stages with looking at dedicating the spaces, at least within the Chown and Hanson, and then we'll see what the utilization rate is.
Thank you. I'll talk to you away from council about this issue as well. So my other question, and it was raised, it's a follow-up to Councillor Stroud's question. I know electric buses have a shorter range, and that eventually electric buses will probably be the wave of the future. But in the meantime, I know many communities are looking towards some hybrids or some natural gas vehicles just to get away from the more polluting forms of fuel. Is that something that we can consider as well?
Through you, Your Worship, we haven't actually invested a lot of time exploring natural gas buses. As I indicated previously, we're certainly looking at the electric bus market. Toronto is testing different models of buses that are available. So yes, the battery range and the longevity is a bit unique to different communities. It's also based on the loads that are being carried, and so those are the things. And we are a participant in a program run by a consortium called QTRIC that's doing a lot of work exploring opportunities for electrification of bus fleets. So we are monitoring it. The one thing that does concern us is the battery life and the reliability of the vehicle. With the battery life, there's really two options right now. With fully electric, you have a bus that goes out on a charging station at the depot, and those are expensive enough. But the really expensive ones are, you can drive up and charge for a few minutes while the bus is dwelling. But those types of charging stations, the charging station alone is in excess of $1 million. So we're just watching to see what is happening, what the potential is, and we really do want to see the experience of Toronto.
Thank you.
And if I may add to that, Your Worship, it's important to recognize as well that we also purchase a biodiesel blend for our Kingston Transit fleet, which provides a significant carbon reduction over straight diesel.
Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, through you. I am very encouraged by these numbers. I think that we should celebrate. We're one of the few jurisdictions in the whole world that has met our Paris Agreement targets already, which is quite amazing. But I'm also very encouraged by the approach of being cautiously optimistic, because I think we need to stay diligent and really examine the data that we have and look for additional sets of data to see how we can continue to reduce our emissions. And on the note of diligence, I'm wondering, Mr. McClatchy, if you could speak to the reductions. You mentioned in your presentation that some of the lack of GHGs come from Ontario moving off coal. What percentage of our reductions come from that provincial move?
Thank you. Through Your Worship. Thank you for that question, and actually gives me the opportunity to correct a minor error that was in the staff report. It actually identified the majority of emission reductions as coming from the greening of electricity, and then a significant amount coming from the natural gas, and they should be flipped around, actually. But the amount of greenhouse gas emission reduction that comes from the greening of the electricity grid, we've estimated at about 15% of that 32%, whatever that works out to. So it's a large component, but it's not the major component.
All right. You've also outlined a number of very good initiatives moving us towards further reduction. Are there any other areas of low-hanging fruit within the city that would allow us to reduce further?
I think the work that we're doing right now with Utilities Kingston on biogas, looking at the feasibility of biogas production, is very prospective. You can imagine that we're all quite happy with using natural gas in our homes because it's a cheap fuel and it's a reliable fuel. But the production of biogas would provide us an opportunity to greatly reduce the carbon impact of that activity. So I'm very hopeful that the work that Utilities Kingston is doing right now on looking at the feasibility of biogas production using wastes from things like sewage treatment plants or maybe even from our source separated organics program, I'm very hopeful that that's going to yield a good result.
And I understand correctly that there's a report coming before council about the feasibility of adopting that technology?
Yeah, Utilities Kingston will be bringing it's part of their biosolids master planning process. They will be bringing that forward, I think, by the end of March or something like that.
Excellent. My final question is about the potential for Kingston to become a carbon neutral city. I know that other jurisdictions within the country have set that as a target and have set about studying how that is a possibility. I'm wondering if we have the information available to even look at that as an option.
I think other municipalities, as you mentioned, have examined that. Some have even officially made it a goal.
Right.
So I think the information is there. It would take work on the behalf of staff and experts to examine what those opportunities are if we wanted to move forward in a meaningful way and have actions that were well researched.
Thank you.
Councillor Doherty.
Thank you for your presentation. It was very good. It's also great to hear how much the city has done already with our lead buildings and like Councillor Cully just mentioned, we have addressed a lot of the low-hanging fruit. I wonder if we've reached out to business industries and our institutions for some innovative kind of challenges, how we could perhaps be leaders in reducing greenhouse gases as a community.
Certainly, through you, Your Worship. That is actually a part of our implementation approach to our Kingston Climate Action Plan, is to work with Sustainable Kingston's Green Economy Program, and that's an important part of that program. That's exactly what they do, is they reach out to the business and institutional sectors of our community. They provide them a framework so they can evaluate their carbon emissions and set targets and make action plans to reduce their emissions. So the intent there is that they can harness that interest and that expertise to identify opportunities and peer-to-peer discussions so that one group can learn from another group.
Okay, so the other day I was speaking with a professor from Queen's, and he was suggesting that a group of students could get together. Should I send him and the students to Sustainable Kingston?
I think that would be an excellent idea there.
Okay.
Always looking for new volunteers.
Okay, I'll act on that one. And my next question is about adaptation. So what is the city actually doing when we have opportunities to prepare for more extreme weather? Because the reality with climate change is by not acting on it, it's even more expensive. And just the last couple of days, we've had these extreme weathers. Our plumbers are making a great business at the moment, but that leads to other issues that we have throughout, like our pipes in the city. And when we dig our roads up, do we use those opportunities to prepare for more extreme weathers?
That's a great question. I think, climate related or not, we have a number of departments, Utilities Kingston, Engineering, Public Works, Rec and Leisure. They're all affected by extreme weather, and they all have plans in place to deal with things like, very cold weather, very hot weather, intense rainstorms, those sorts of things. Those plans are in place, and they're tied into our own emergency planning exercises as a city. But in terms of an adaptation plan for climate itself, we've only done the early stages of that. And I think there's more to do.
Okay. Can I have one more question? Sorry. When I door knocked this summer, I met a few senior citizens who didn't have air conditioning, and of course the extreme weather. I was thinking the last couple of days how homeless people deal with that. So it's an issue that we have to really also build in the social aspect, how this extreme weather affects people. Just want to add that.
Okay. Seeing, yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. Sort of a general question. When you're stating the reduction targets, a baseline year is picked, and sometimes governments change those baselines to suit their inability to meet them. So, which is lower, 30% below 2005 greenhouse gas levels, or 30% below 2011 levels, which is the municipal, the first one is the national?
Through your worship, if memory serves me right, our emissions in 2005 were slightly less than our emissions in 2011. So then if you wanted to say which one was the more ambitious goal, I think the 30% below 2005, only because 2011 emissions were slightly higher than 2005 emissions.
Right. So now, is either of these levels sufficient to prevent worst effects of climate change?
Great question. I don't know if I have the letters behind my name to answer it.
Well, I'm talking to the cautious side of your optimism.
Is that a rhetorical question?
No, it's not. I actually, if you believe you're pursuing certain levels and you want to get there, but you're actually not getting someplace you need to get, then your ambitions are thwarted before you begin. And Mr. McClatchy in past incarnations has sort of warned us about these things, so I'm just bringing him back to that. And I have a follow-up just on that. Like, the big fear for environmental scientists and others is that we'll get to the point where there's self-perpetuating feedback loops. And we are perilously close to that, according to the last UN report. So that's where I'm going here. And I think if we're going to have these reports, we need to discuss that. So whatever response you've got, please.
At the risk of getting on a soapbox, I think that it's important to recognize that Canadians are amongst the highest energy users of any people in the world, and we have the highest carbon footprints of any people in the world. So it's, and from an economic, financial perspective, we're probably the most able to do something about that. So I think we have a great duty to do something about that. And whether or not 30% below 2011 is enough to save the planet, I don't know. I suspect it's probably not, but let's do our darndest to get there.
I agree with that last sentiment. Thanks very much. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have no other briefings tonight, so we will move on in our agenda. Next up is petitions. Are there any petitions to present? Councillor Doherty.
I have a petition here for the installation of traffic control light and a proper crosswalk for Norman Rogers Drive and Sir John A. Macdonald. I just want to mention that the community has had safety concerns regarding the lack of proper crossway at Norman Rogers and Sir John A. Macdonald for several years now. These petitions were prepared to share this concern with Council and are a response to the recent collision that happened at this location. The online petition included a map of the location, and it shows 7 lanes that pedestrians actually have to cross to navigate in all sorts of weather. And I'm going to actually pass that around and give the petition to the clerk after I read it, sorry. The intersection of Norman Rogers and Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard is dangerous. A traffic control light and proper crosswalk is needed on an urgent basis. I live in the neighborhood. This is a very busy intersection for pedestrians, cyclists, cars, and school buses. Hundreds of people cross daily to access the 701 and 702 express bus. People of all ages and abilities cross here. Children, seniors, students, parents, with baby strollers, skateboarders. The recent collision with a pedestrian confirmed our worst fears. The time is long overdue to fix this danger to the public. Please implement the decision of City Council from 2016 to reduce the speed on Sir John A. Macdonald Boulevard and install a traffic control device and proper crosswalk on an urgent basis.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other petitions to present? Okay.
Pass that on.
Okay. So with that, we will move. Next, we have one motion of condolence moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Mayor Patterson. That says sincere condolences of the City of Kingston Council be extended to the family and many friends of Ross McKenzie, who recently passed away. Ross was a captain and a veteran of the Canadian Armed Corps, serving in Canada and Europe. He is a graduate of the Royal Military College. After assuming many leadership roles at the college, he became the RMC Museum Curator and was appointed Museum Curator Emeritus in 2015. He was instrumental in helping the Rideau Canal gain UNESCO recognition as a World Heritage Site. He will be missed by the museum and heritage communities. So we will call the vote, please. And that carries. Okay, we have no deferred motions, so we will now move on to reports. First up is report number 9 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor McLaren, seconded by Councillor Hutchison, that report number 9 from the Chief Administrative Officer, consent, be received and adopted.
So there are 3 clauses. Would anyone like any of the clauses separated? Councillor Sanik?
Clause 3, please.
Clause 3. Councillor Chappelle?
Yes, Clause 1, please.
Clause 1? Okay, so we're going to deal with them one at a time. So first up, we have the... yes, so given the fact that 2 of the 3 have been separated, we're good. So here we go. So clause number 1, proposed renaming of a portion of a municipal road from Horizon Court to Horizon Drive. Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Your Worship. When I was made aware of this name change happening with the city, I wanted to find out the process and what was involved, and I'd like to give accolades to the staff members that I spoke with, because I had a number of questions with regards to this process, making sure that the citizens living in that area would actually not be impacted in a negative way. In fact, I found out there were 31 property owners. Of those property owners, they all received notification. I asked about potential costs that they may incur and which services would be notified. And I'm greatly relieved that everyone from Bell Canada to Tri-Board Student Transportation Services, Kingston Police, is made aware of this. And I did end up speaking with some constituents in the area, and there will be no cost for changing their driver's licenses or passports or other government documentation. So it's something that I'm glad that there was a lot of time and preparation taking place to address my concerns, and I wanted to just thank staff for that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll call the vote on Clause 1. Please vote. And that carries. Clause 2, award of contract, Kingston Community Brand Position. Councillor Neal?
Yes. I have some reservations about this motion. I've had 2 or 3 constituents that have contacted me. I think it was 3 with, although one person may have been he and his partner, I'm not sure. But they were puzzled by both the cost of this, and I am curious, given the improvement of our communications department, which has been greatly enhanced, and why we would be going externally to a consultant. Why wouldn't we do this as a contest within the community, supervised with public meetings by our communications group? The most, as one person said in an email I received, and I think several of us received it, you can fill a lot of potholes for $90,000. And I tend to agree with that statement. And so I'll be choosing to vote against this in the hope that we can do it, do just as good a job in-house.
Okay. Commissioner Hurdle?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So I just want to clarify for council, first of all, we do not have the capacity to do this in-house without hiring substantial additional staff. I want to maybe bring council back, and I appreciate there are new members of council around the horseshoe that weren't here in April 2018. But there was a report presented to council at that time recommending this exact process with a budget of up to $125,000. And the process was to look at a community branding, so not the city corporate logo itself, but the community branding and how we can bring all these stakeholders together. So the funds that were approved at that time, from a staff perspective, we simply followed the process that was laid out, and with the funds that we have to do that. And the report tonight is really to retain some support to help to do this across the community, as it is not a corporate exercise, and I can guarantee you that we do not have the capacity to do this internally.
Okay, thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Through you, I was speaking to some residents today and was at loss for words to tell them what actually comes out of this process. I found the report helpful in that it delineated each step of the process. I found it helpful in that it articulated how the contract was awarded. That was all very transparent and good to explain to the residents. But does a motto for the city come out of this? We just heard not a new logo, a new mission statement. What is the alignment and the anchoring of the branding that is discussed in this process? What does that actually mean at the end of the day?
Commissioner Hurdle?
So thank you, and through you. So I appreciate that I shared, I think, an example with a couple of councillors in terms of other communities that have gone through a similar process, Milton being one of them, I think Hamilton another one. So it's about having a vision in terms of this community brand, and yes, it could include, for lack of a better word, a slogan, and I'm sure that others could come up with a much better definition for it. But really bring in all the key stakeholders together to agree as to what that means and how it's going to be utilized, so the messaging behind it. And there, as part of this work, there are a couple of things. One is there is a tremendous amount of engagement with the key stakeholders and the public. So one of the reasons why we were recommending Scott Thornley was because of their level of engagement. It was quite detailed in their proposal and what they had done in other communities like Milton. The other piece to that is also some expertise in terms of graphic design. They come forward with that expertise in being able to provide not only the messaging, but anything that might visually need to accompany that messaging. So that's what we could expect out of this process, and that's something that, again, we recommended as far as process back in April of 2018.
So if it's possible, through you, Mr. Mayor, if it's possible that a slogan could change, are there any projected costs for infrastructure? I think of city signs welcoming people to the community that would need to be updated after this is completed, should it be completed.
Commissioner Hurdle?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, so we anticipate that there will be a lot of work done through our social media and electronically, so those should not generate any additional costs. As we create new either marketing material or publications, we would make some changes as we go along. I would not anticipate that we would start changing signage on our vehicles, for example, where we have Kingston. So I don't anticipate we would do those things. And like I indicated, I think in my email to you, Councillor, that at this point we anticipate that costs would be quite limited.
Thank you.
Okay, next on my list is Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. I was one of the ones who supported this back in April or May or whenever, but it's a much older process than that. We've been doing this, or been moving along in this direction for quite a while. And one of the things that I'm feeling now is a sense of deja vu. We did this, something very similar, nearly started 4 years ago, and what came out of it was that Fresh Made Daily, or Made Fresh Daily, or Fresh Baked Daily, or something like that. It was in part of our integrated tourism marketing strategy. And I think we've already done this, maybe not exactly what they're describing, and to add more brands, I think is going to confuse the matter. So although I may have supported looking into this in the past, on reflection, I will not be supporting this. Part of it is because we don't want to dilute the brand that we already have. Adding more or even subtracting some doesn't strike me as the best thing to do now. If we make a new brand anchor or community branding that is too narrow, we leave out a lot of stuff that could be attractive to people. And if we make it too general, then we're diluting it. So it strikes me that there might be, we're not sure, there might be a sweet spot in the middle, but if there is, I think we've already got it with History and Innovation Thrive. And what they're proposing here seems to me to complicate the matter. I also recall that it was based on a book called Town Inc., which was presented to us by a lot of people during some of the consultation phases maybe 3 years ago. And when I read that book, it was one of the more fluffy books I've read, and it was really directed at one industry towns that are dying, which is certainly not true for Kingston. So for that reason, that's another reason to vote against this. But the biggest one, or I guess one of the biggest ones for me, is that it's a Toronto company. Part of economic development is that we spend money here. Our expenses are somebody else's income. And when they takes it as income, it becomes an expense for them. They buy something locally, hopefully, and it becomes income for somebody else. When we send this money outside of Kingston, we start that expense income chain in Toronto instead of in Kingston. So I see this as a bit of de-development and certainly not necessary to be done, especially for 90K. In fact, I suggest that perhaps we should put that 90K into new things that that might come out of strategic planning. I know that one thing that the staff have challenged me on is that if you want something new done, tell us what you would like what you'd like us not to do. I would suggest to you that this might be one of those things that we shouldn't be doing, and that we should be moving the money to whatever might come out of strategic planning. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Your Worship. I sort of see branding as kind of serving two functions. One of them is kind of uniting community around a logo or a goal. The other, though, is to reach out. So one of the things that we're trying to do as a community is to reach out, for example, to attract physicians to come and live in the community, to attract new entrepreneurs who may wish to set up their businesses here, to attract young professionals to come into the community. My sense of what this sort of stage of branding is about, and I'm going to defer to acting CEO Hurdle on this one, is that we have largely sort of taken care of the logo. That's relatively new, and the slogan, I think people generally feel reflects the community well. But the goal now is to kind of reach out to market ourselves through our brand to interested parties that might want to relocate to Kingston. So if that's the case, For example, if it was if that was a useful exercise in attracting more family physicians to Kingston, I think that generally we would say $90,000 is a reasonable cost for that purpose. So I think if that's the purpose, and I'll, again, if you don't mind, deferring to Councillor Hurtle through you, your worship, I think there's some merit to this.
Commissioner Hurtle?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So, Councillor Hill, you're absolutely correct. The intent here is to try to position the overall city, not the corporation itself, but the overall city, to be able to attract people and businesses. And I will say that most of the time you hear businesses, but in this case, I think what you will see more and more is the need to attract skilled individuals to our community. We have a shortage in terms of skills in our community. We already feel it significantly in the healthcare sector, and that's only going to continue to grow with the more and more retirements that are coming up. And we are competing not with Brockville and Belleville. We are competing with communities in the GTA and southwestern Ontario where skilled professionals may choose to relocate there rather than come to Kingston. And I'm not saying that this will make all the difference, but this is about how we're coming together as a community and how we can help brand that community so that Queen's University or Empire Life and other organization, we can work collectively together in terms of that branding and get that message out to the rest of the community.
Okay, thank you. Deputy Mayor, will you take the chair?
I take the chair and I recognize you.
Thank you. I'm just going to add to Councillor Hill's comments, and certainly I agree with much of what has been said. This is a refresher for those of us that were around the table earlier last year, that we remembered this discussion, but for the new councillors that may not, that really this was very much a discussion that did to some degree connect with the tourism brand that Councillor McLaren made reference to. So as a result of the work that was done in building a tourism brand, Kingston has probably seen 2 or 3 of the biggest years for tourism that this city has ever seen. It's been a tremendous, tremendous injection of growth into the community, and that was really what was the genesis for some of the community discussion about how do we take that same approach and apply it to the community as a whole. So if we become successful by building a brand to be able to bring visitors to Kingston, how can we take that brand and use that to be able to bring residents to Kingston, obviously to fill our workforce gaps, to be able to attract new businesses to Kingston? That is very much the vision of what's going on. This is far more than just a new motto or a new slogan. Now, I think that the fundamental issue is that everybody in this room knows very well the incredible things that are happening in our community. We are innovative. We are experiencing growth in our cultural scene. There are so many exciting things happening in our business community. But if you were to stop and ask the average person walking in downtown Toronto, say, what do you think of when you hear Kingston? There's still a disconnect. There's too many people that when you ask them that question, they connect to what Kingston was 10, 20, 30 years ago. They're not aware of some of the things that are happening in our community. So this is how do we build that? How do we refresh that? How do we communicate that? So again, you look at that success in tourism and say, why not apply that to the broader community as a whole so that we can start to achieve some of these other goals as well. A couple of other points. I think it was well said that a $90,000 investment, again, when you think of the potential return on that investment, I think it's very well placed. The other comment that was made about was the firm that is not from Kingston. You know what? I would just suggest that perhaps for an exercise like this, maybe we need somebody that is not from Kingston that can help to see that neutral lens to see how we are perceived outside of the city, and ultimately be an honest broker to be able to bring many different parties and stakeholders together in our community to talk about how do we all come together with this. Because that was the work that was done with the tourism brand, bringing a number of disparate groups within the tourism industry all to agree on the same vision and the same brand. And that really is the goal that was discussed earlier in 2018. So Personally, I think that there's great value that's attached to this, but again, I would certainly encourage council to support it, and ultimately reminding council that we have approved the budget for it. The reason why this is in front of us is because city staff are not recommending the lowest bidder, they're recommending the bidder that brings the highest value to the table. So with that, thank you very much.
I return the chair, and I would like to have a turn speaking when it's my turn.
Thank you. So next on my list is Councillor Bowman.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I find it was actually had some discussions earlier about this, and the level of engagement from the community on this has been great. It's a $90,000 decision that we're making. It goes back to the previous term of council, and one thing that I kind of scratch my head over is sometimes you'll hear more from people on a $90,000 decision than you will on a $10 million decision, and I struggle sometimes to rationalize that. Certain things get into people's minds. So obviously this is something where branding the city, we have a current kind of brand, and we have the opportunity to, maybe it's not a rebrand, maybe it's a refresh, we don't know what that's going to look like. I have a quick question for staff, which is how old is our current brand, if you were to pick a number?
Commissioner Hurdle?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So I do want to clarify that we do not have an overall community brand. We have a corporate logo and motto, which I think goes back to amalgamation. And we're not suggesting at this point that this is wrong and we need to redo that. What we're suggesting is we need to have an overall community brand. One point, if I may add as well, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the selection of the proposed company, under purchasing bylaw, we do not have the authority, the right to give preferential treatment to local businesses. So we cannot do that. I just wanted to clarify that.
So thank you very much. That answered the question perfectly. So we don't have a community brand in essence right now. We have a corporate brand. Most companies throughout the city have their own brands and everything. But I think what we're missing right now is what connects all those things, what connects the dots. When the mayor mentioned it, when you're in Toronto and you're talking about Kingston, what's Kingston to them? When you're in Calgary or somewhere else, what's Kingston to them? And I think that this has the opportunity for $90,000, which again, everybody seems to cue in on that amount. And in the grand scheme of things, what's the potential that it has? So don't look at this as what's the cost of not making the change. And I think having a new brand for the entire city, and again, this is just starting the process with this company to come in and do those consultations, to actually go out and talk to all these stakeholder groups to say, what is Kingston? What is our brand? So it is, in a sense, a new endeavor. This really is about what attracts people to Kingston, and that's something that we've always maybe wondered and have always sort of been trying to do through tourism. So it's a chance to work with that. But there's one more thing that this can do. And if we can establish what our brand is, we can maybe work towards fixing the problem that we've just heard from earlier tonight, which was what keeps people in Kingston. So let's figure out what our brand is. Let's go through this process. It's $90,000. Maybe it is a $90,000 question, but at the end of the day, maybe it's $1 million question. So I'd like to know what the answer to this is, so I'm going to support this. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Stroud.
Thank you. Okay, so we've had a divergence of opinions and points, and I'd just like to revisit a couple of them for framing of my own comments. First of all, to the point of this being an external company, being a company from Toronto, that's the first thing that sort of jumps out. In a way, what's happened here is, I also remember voting in favor of this last April. What's happened here is we've said yes in principle to the rebranding, and now that we see a little bit more of what it's going to look like, and we see, for example, what this firm has come up with for the branding of other cities that they've done, which is very relevant work, and what they based their proposal on, there's a little bit of is that all we're getting, or is that it? And that's what I'm hearing from my constituents. A little bit of a meh, okay, that's not quite as exciting as I thought it was going to be. And the other aspect about the local that it's very frustrating, essentially. I hear this all the time. Young entrepreneurs or small companies with some success locally having trouble growing to the next level and staying in Kingston. We want to keep them in Kingston, of course. I mean, yes, we'd like people to move to Kingston as well, and we'd like firms to come here and set up, of course. But the ones that we have, that's what we heard in the whole KEDCO review process. The ones that we have, we're not supporting properly. And one of the major reasons, in my opinion, is because of this purchasing bylaw and the fact that we don't have the ability to put in there that we can give preferential treatment to local firms. But I would go further and say we actually, in this RFP, say the opposite. It almost is in the description that we are looking for an external firm. And the mayor mentioned that this might be preferable because of the neutral lens. And I would say, okay, that's true. You get perspective from an outsider. But at the same time, a local talent, and it doesn't have to be for the entire process, but as you can see, this firm actually is hiring another firm to do the research, right? So there's actually two firms involved. We have that talent in Kingston. We do. It's just that it didn't work in the RFP the way it was written. The third category of the RFP, company profile, resources, and relevant experience. I'd like to ask a question, because it doesn't break it down by, where's a chart of the total scores, but it doesn't break it down by score. The winning, the one that you're recommending, which was the second lowest but the highest score, what was it about their profile, resources, or relevant experience, and what was their score in that 30% weighting?
Who would like to answer that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I do not have the detailed information. I can tell you that we did look at a number of their work that they had done in other communities. So I think I mentioned Milton before. I believe there was one in Niagara region as well that they completed. I don't have their entire profile in front of me, but I'd be happy to provide that to members of council and send that electronically if you'd like.
Okay, well, that doesn't answer, it didn't give me enough detail to help me support this firm as the chosen one. If I knew why they were better than the talent we have locally, I'd feel a lot better. But just sort of, all I've got right now is the mayor's comment about the neutral lens.
So Deputy Mayor Stroud, I believe Commissioner Hurdle has something else perhaps to add to address. Commissioner Hurdle?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So I do not believe, and my colleagues that are sitting here with me that participated in the process can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do not believe that there are any companies listed in here that are entirely local. I believe that there may have been consultants involved with some of these companies that may be local, but overall companies based in Kingston with all their employees operating out of Kingston, I do not believe that's the case.
Okay. Did you have something to say as well?
Mr. Desjardins?
I would just, through you, I would just confirm that that is correct, that this was an open process for an RFP. No Kingston-based organization submitted a full proposal, although I believe there was one that involved some sub work for part of one of the projects.
Yes, well, one of the constituents that called me did a little digging in on the city website of the original report. And apparently you could see which firms had downloaded the materials you would need to submit a bid, and he identified at least 4 local firms that had done that, but noted that none of them had actually applied. So what I'm assuming from all this, and in the absence of anything to the contrary, is that the way that the RFP is written, it discouraged the local firms from applying, from making a serious bid. If they knew they were up against large external firms from Toronto, they would be discouraged, because one of the criteria is company profile, which is the size of your company and the renown of your company. So unless I'm mistaken, I don't see any reason why we should proceed with something that we're so lukewarm about. And I think I'm going to join Councillor Neal and vote against.
Thank you. Councillor Senek.
Thank you, Your Worship. I won't be supporting the recommendation. I did vote for the brand positioning to go forward back in April, but what's happened between now and then was the election and going door to door and hearing from like every house, our roads, our sidewalks needing to be repaired, and and traffic issues, which are going to cause, have to have traffic lights to solve. That will be $500,000, and it's just money, money, money. And maybe the problem tonight is that we're 1 week till budget. We just got the budget, material last night to see what roads are actually going to be in the budget, and I just can't support $87,000 tonight going towards this when it's road repair and sidewalk repair on my mind right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ostroff.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson, and through you, I have to say I agree considerably with Councillor Osanek. I do appreciate the work the staff has done, and I don't want to exasperate them either. And saying we're flip-flopping here, and I appreciate what Councillor Bohm has said. We're it's 100,000, but we could be looking at $1 million. But what's changed is for me is the campaign and the election, and I certainly got calls and inquiries about this as well, and the concerns, and I think that people are saying, well, what about us for once? And I'll be voting no for Countryside tonight because there's so much that needs to be done in our roads, and I think that we can save some money here, and there's lots of good work promoting our brand through tourism right now, and lots of other ways that we do promote the great name and the projection and the perception of our city. So I'll take a buy at this one for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Chappelle.
Thank you, Worship. One of the things that I also experienced knocking door to door, meeting with constituents, is the great fear of spending all this money on consultants. It just seems to be a perpetual season to spend money. What I'd like to recommend is perhaps we are about to embark in a very important strategic planning process. There's a lot of community involvement, community engagement. Maybe this is the opportunity to put this out to the floor to citizens to see if we really need a brand or what their opinions are. Or maybe this is part of the questions that we put out to the community. What was referred to a number of times was the work they did in Milton. And when I looked at the process they took, 6 months, I talked to 50 stakeholder interviews, had 650 public survey inputs. And for me, the cost, I can't see that there. Then I looked at their other plans on Niagara and Mississauga. The color scheme was very similar. So why don't we just have, instead of a big fancy M, why don't we just put a big K out there? But in seriousness, I do think there is some merit to having a globalized community plan going forward. I do agree that it's sensitive on the marketing of this at this time, and perhaps what's best is we defer this rather than knocking it apart. Let's defer it till after we go through budget process and strategic planning. I do think there's an opportunity to have a win-win for everybody and make sure there's more input put into the process. Thank you.
So are you putting forward a motion to defer?
Yes, through your worship, yes, I am.
So, okay. So first of all, we do need to specify the motion to defer till after the strategic planning process. Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Kiley. Is there any debate with respect to time or place? Okay. Deputy Mayor Stroud?
It would be more to, often with deferrals, there is something that needs to happen in the interim. Is that part of, you're talking about consultation with the various agencies and boards. Is that something that needs to be in the deferral motion?
I'm not sure it does, Councillor Stroud. I think that we have agreed through our last council meeting that we are going to have an extensive public consultation through a website. Maybe this is something that could be included as part of the website consultation process. Also, we'll be having the open house and other engagement opportunities, and I think it could be encapsulated in that. So if you would like to offer a friendly amendment to offer some structure to that, I'd be happy to entertain.
So I'm going to advise against that. I think that the answer was clear. So what the motion to defer on the floor will say is that this item will come back to council post, if our last session is in April, It's going to come probably sometime in May. And then at that point, we'll be in decision to say, what do we do? What do we want to do next, given the input that we've received? Okay, so we'll call the vote then on the motion to defer. Please vote. And that carries by a vote of 12-1. Okay, on to clause number 3, loan agreement for a temporary installation of Climate Change is Here photographic display on Market Square produced by Canada Science and Technology Museum. Councillor Stanek.
Thank you, Your Worship. On a positive note, I think this display is really exciting. I can't wait to see it. I see that it's an exhibition from National Geographic. I've seen their exhibitions before. The pictures are outstanding quality. I just can't wait. It will be a free exhibit. It will be all spring long. It looks like it's outside. It's going to be in Market Square. Can that just be confirmed? It would basically be where the bleachers are right now for the skating rink. Is that where it's going to be through staff for Sustainable Kingston?
Ms. Salter-Keene.
Through you, Your Worship, the exhibit's going to be on this side of City Hall. So is that the south side of City Hall? Because it's...
That's
no, that's...
The east?
East side of City Hall. Sorry.
And outside, right? It is outside.
Yes, outside on the east side of City Hall, sorry.
And my second question is, how did this come to be? Did I know that it was in Ottawa, so did someone like one of the staff at Sustainable Kingston or the city, did they see it and inquire to bring it to Kingston, or did the exhibitors approach Kingston to see if we wanted it? How did it come to be?
Through Your Worship, I actually saw it and contacted the museums to bring it here. And so we're partnering with Sustainable Kingston.
Yeah, that's terrific. Thank you.
Okay, so we will call the vote on clause 3, please. And that carries. Okay, on to report number 10 from the CAO.
Moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Chappell, that report number 10 from the Chief Administrative Officer recommend be received and adopted.
So there's just the one clause, Local Planning Appeal Tribunal Appeals, 223 Princess Street. Councillor Neal.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions and then a couple of comments, if I can. And I know I've brought this up with the city solicitor, but my understanding, and it's been confirmed by some very reliable retired planners, is that tribunal doesn't appear to have the authority to meddle after the board has rendered a decision unless that appeal is based on some errors in law. So perhaps the solicitor can set me straight if that's not an accurate comment.
Ms. Nicholson?
Through you, Your Worship, in response to Councillor Neal's question, the rules provide that there's two bases for appeal. There is one for review of an LPAT decision, and there is also the opportunity to appeal ask leave to appeal to divisional court for a review as well.
Have we been in contact with the tribunal about the likelihood of an appeal being accepted?
Through Your Worship, the city's not in a position to do that. The applicant in this matter has filed for those leaves and or requests for review, not the City of Kingston.
I guess my concern is about why would we hire an expensive outside solicitor and a planner if an appeal, if we aren't, as I understand it, we weren't a party in the tribunal hearing. We weren't a participant in the hearing. And the last vote that was taken by this council, the will of council was to say no to the development by a 6-6 vote, which is procedurally the case. So the city took no action and never requested standing as a party at the tribunal hearing, although our planner was subpoenaed by the developer. I guess that raises some concerns. Why isn't so the developer is formally requesting mediation of the tribunal, but why would the city do their bidding? Why would in fact, the original appellants, as I understand it, requested mediation, and it was the developer who said, no, I don't want to mediate, and turned down that opportunity for mediation.
So I think staff, could we ask staff want to respond to some of those questions?
Okay, that's fine. And I have this time, so I don't want to get time out.
So just so everyone's clear around this table, that the moment you ask a question and you stop speaking, I stop the clock. So that does not, so if staff take more time to answer your questions, that does not count towards your 5 minutes. Commissioner Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So I will start and pass it over to Ms. Nicholson, who I'm sure will want to add, and we also have some expertise at the table tonight, which Ms. Nicholson will introduce in terms of Adam Brown, who's a solicitor as well. So in terms of the reason why, from a city staff perspective, why we're bringing this forward to council. So this is not about the developer requesting a mediation. And so I just want to be clear. This is about an opportunity that we see as a city to get involved and try to facilitate something. I think everybody would agree that at the end of the day, we would like to see some form of development on the property. I think everybody would agree that we would like to see housing for a community, which we keep hearing that that's probably our number one critical issue right now in terms of lack of housing, with a 0.6% vacancy rate. And I think we would, from a city perspective, definitely with the redevelopment of a property, and encourage additional assessment growth to help with our conversations that we will be having around tax rates for the city. So this is something that city staff are bringing forward. It is not something that we're bringing forward at the request of the applicant. It is something that we're bringing forward because we do believe that we have an opportunity as a city to play a role. It is an important development for the city. So with that, I will pass it along to Ms. Nicholson.
Ms. Nicholson.
Through you, Your Worship. In response to Councillor Neal's question, which is basically dealing with the recommendation that has been forwarded in this report, as indicated by Ms. Hurdle, I am accompanied by Adam Brown this evening. He's a partner with the law firm Sherman Brown and has extensive experience, up to 30 years, in planning and development law, and certainly extensive experience dealing with matters before the tribunal, including appeals and handling of appeals. And I think that in this particular case, he has the experience to assist us with responses regarding the process at this point, as well as providing additional experience given additional information given his experience as to how we could move forward with this recommendation. And so at this point, with your worship's permission, I would ask him to further answer this question.
Point of order?
Yes. My least favorite words. But my point of order is we haven't given approval for an external lawyer to come and talk to us. That is my understanding what this motion is saying. And until this motion passes, I don't understand why that would be.
It's not a point of order, but it is a valid question, and you do have the floor.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So the recommendation that is before council is one that speaks to retaining a solicitor to initiate a process, a potential process of mediation. It is not requesting permission to retain expertise when required to provide proper advice to council. So tonight, we do have someone who is here to provide advice to council. If council does not want to proceed with a potential mediation process, obviously we will not retain anyone to do that work. But we do believe and feel that council should be getting the proper expertise advice on this particular file. It is a very complex file.
So I will allow it, but what I will ask is that there be a response specifically directed to some of the questions that Councillor Neal was asking, which I think are good questions. So, Councillor Neal, could you just restate some of the questions you had?
Yes.
And then we'll ask for Mr. Brown to respond.
My questions actually so far haven't been questions of planning as I understand it. They've been questions of process. So the developer has requested mediation of the tribunal. Why is the city even getting involved given this history and the expenses that would be incurred by city taxpayers? Typically, with external planners and external legal, it's upwards of $100,000 that could be the cost to the city for this. And I'm going to ask a rhetorical question. If the decision had gone the other way, would a request by the appellant groups even be considered here tonight? And that's probably a rhetorical question, but...
Okay, so why don't we pause there, and you still have 2 minutes on the clock.
Thank you.
Mr. Brown?
So thank you. My name is Adam Brown, and I'm the lawyer with 30 years of experience in land use planning and tribunal and formerly the OMB matters, and have dealt with these issues on a day-to-day basis, and it's the only area of my practice. And I wrote some of the questions down that you had raised through you, Your Worship, and would like to answer them. So first of all, the applicant in this situation didn't ask for mediation. The applicant moved forward to seek a leave to appeal to the courts, number one, and they also sought a rehearing before the Ontario Municipal Board, now the tribunal, because it transitioned during the time of their process. And what that does is it sets out two potential courses of action which would actually cost this municipality more money to defend in the end than if the municipality took control of the process. And I'll tell you why I say that. If the municipality truly doesn't like the 16-story original proposal, which was the decision of the municipality, and they want to ensure that that doesn't get approved, let's follow the course of action for a minute. If the courts allow a leave application to proceed, and you have no say in that right now because you haven't taken a position, you have a no decision, the courts can then say the board got it wrong, the tribunal now, and you've got to go back to another hearing. Then you're going to have your own constituents saying, why are we not representing their interests in ensuring that that doesn't happen? That's number one. If number two, they don't go through the court proceeding and they go for a rehearing before the OMB, and the board says, you know what? There is a reason to reopen the decision and you're going to go back to the drawing board, they will be going forward again with the 16-story proposal. The position that this report has taken and what you're being asked to do today by your staff is one that is very progressive, and it's being done in a very open and fair manner to all your constituents, because I read the letter also from Mr. Donnelly. You have taken a formal position before your council in an open forum and said, here's what we want to do. Number one, the Planning Act says municipalities should take control of their process. And you are then going to make a decision. And your decision is going to say, we don't want 16 stories. We want a compromise proposal based on these reports that were done, a low teen proposal as I review. And we want to make sure that we take an active role and we minimize the costs. We don't want any more hearings for our constituents. We don't want their lawyers to have to follow these two courses of conduct, because they will have to follow these two courses of conduct. We also don't want them to go through a new hearing and spend the money on a new hearing. And at the end of the day, if all of those routes are unsuccessful, you have an applicant who said, we're coming back with a revised proposal, and this municipality is going to have to spend the money to go through that process again, and then the residents are going to have to pursue that process. So you are saying now, we are trying to take control of the process. you're sending a message to the community at large, outside of the city who are going to invest in the city of Kingston, that we are going to make sure that in the future we're engaged in our own process, and you're doing so in a public and open forum, and you're doing so in a reasonable way, which will then allow you to put forward not a 16-story proposal, take control of the system, and go forward with a compromise proposal.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Neal, you have the floor.
Much of that sure sounded like it was planning and not addressing my questions directly. But I do want to say, I'm the current and I'm the former chair of planning. I've sat through all of this process, and what the legal opinion that was just stated ignored was that we had a peer review that clearly said 17 stories is too much. We had a full OMB hearing, and the judgment rendered was that this proposal did not address our official plan, that it failed both the heritage aspects and our planning aspects that are in the official plan. We are on solid ground for saying no. The reality is it would be much more appropriate response by this developer to return with a new application that better fits our official plan and current zoning. A new proposal by Innate to planning would ensure a full, transparent public process. I just want to remind members of council, we are committed to transparency and open government. What does mediation do? It puts all of the decision-making out of the hands of the community, out of the hands of council, and puts it all behind closed doors. And if this is what this council chooses to support, then we're in total defiance of our statement that we want to be more transparent and open to our community.
30 seconds. Okay, thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through you, I would like to read the last paragraph of the staff report as a jumping off point to my questioning. And it says, staff is recommending that option 3 from the peer review dated August 17th, 2016, attached here 2, provide a guideline for the purposes of approaching the parties to mediate a resolution on the development at 223 Princess Street. I am trying to understand the guidelines for the purposes of approaching the parties to mediate, and what that means in relation to what current zoning allows on that site. We heard from the guest solicitor about a building in the low teens. That's referenced in this report as well. Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'm wondering, I suppose to planning, does the current zoning regulations for that site allow for a building in the low teens?
Ms. Agnew.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. So currently, the zoning that applies to the property allows a maximum height of up to 25.5 meters, which would translate roughly to an 8-story building.
Okay, further to that then, as a new councillor, I'm trying to clarify details from past councils and rulings that came out at the beginning of our term. Is it fair to say, again through you, Mr. Mayor, to planning, that the LPAT ruling spoke against the previous proposal because it didn't conform to the zoning regulations for that site?
No, so in providing a response to the decision, the actual decision didn't say that it failed because it didn't comply with the zoning. The actual decision actually said intensification of the site is warranted, but not at 16 stories. It did not say, through you, Your Worship, the comment that was made by the other councillor that it failed on heritage or urban design or traffic or streetscape. And so it's why when I read that decision in light of the appeals that are being filed, I say to you that what your staff are putting to you as a mediated resolution, they're not saying to you, go and extend litigation. They're saying, take a position that recognizes that the LPAT decision said 8 stories, the existing zoning can't be what they anticipate because it anticipates more intensification than 8, but less than 16. And so the report that's before you today actually acknowledges that, recommends the low teens, and says, let's go mediate, not fight a solution, mediate a solution. It makes sense, and it'll minimize cost to the municipality in terms of process.
Councillor Cutler.
Thank you for the response. To clarify, the low teens is a best guesstimation based on the LPAT's call for intensification on the site without describing what would be an appropriate number of stories, somewhere below 16 but above 8.
Because what it does, you're exactly right. This report doesn't tie your hands. At the end of the day, it allows you to go into mediation with a set of guidelines that you can look at, and then come up with a mediated resolution and still bring it back to council for a final determination. It takes it out of a litigious process and gets rid of all those added expenses of lawyers and planners.
I'm going to pursue this a bit further. So it is possible that the recommendation to move into mediation with a building in the low teens could in fact be once again ruled as inappropriate given the lack of clarity around the number of stories that can be suitable to this site.
So mediation is a process where everyone who goes into the process has to come out, as I always say, somewhat happy and somewhat unhappy. So mediation means that some sort of consensus is attempted to be achieved with all parties, and people have to go in with an open mind to try and achieve that. And if they do it, they avoid any additional costs and they get certainty. And again, it's always subject to council's approval of whatever's mediated.
Thank you. To express my concern clearly now, in the report before us that we're voting on, it says the guidelines for approaching mediation is within this parameters. And I'm afraid, given the ruling, which I have read from LPAT, though it doesn't explicitly express a number of floors that would be appropriate, we could in fact be putting ourselves into a position where we're going to have the exact same ruling again. And this, I think, speaks to a larger problem that is before this council, and one of the things that we must address fundamentally. Will we continue to allow essentially wars over individual projects because they don't conform to the official plan and the zoning guidelines? Or will we have a bigger, larger, more holistic community conversation about how we might update the official plan in a way that allows for good, smart, sustainable development so we don't have to have constant amendments and constant revisions and constant tribunals in the city? I think that both sides of the equation when it comes to development would be pleased with that. And again, I'll just state that I'm afraid that by accepting this proposal, we could actually be furthering the problem that we've already encountered, and for that reason, I can't support it.
Thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Hill.
Thank you, Your Worship. My understanding is that the report and the finding relied primarily on compatibility. Is that a fair?
Correct, of the height and the height alone, correct.
Okay. So it does seem like this is sort of a piecemeal exercise, and I think that sort of reflects what Councillor Kiley was saying. Do you, and I'm through you, Mr. Mayor, when will the Central Kingston Growth Plan be finalized?
Ms. Agnew.
Thank you, and through you. So that study still has approximately about 12 months left to go. We are making good progress, but there is a ways to go before we'll have final recommendations and a set of policies for implementation.
I think that as we sort of move into the strategic planning process, I would see this area, the area where this building is, not so much Princess Street, but probably more so Queen Street, as being kind of an area that's in a bit of transition. Ultimately, I suspect there's going to be more development that's going to happen in that area. But it should happen based on lots of public consultation, because I think we have to have and finalize, I think, the conversations that build the consensus around what is our downtown going to look like. I think most of us agree that intensification is something that has to happen, that development is something that has to happen. We certainly are looking at what we can do to address the vacancy rate. There's a lot of issues at play there, and I think we need to kind of get moving on some of those decisions. I think what we need to do is get this Central Kingston Growth Study done, because I think that would also incorporate into it a secondary plan that will address building heights, for example, massing, etc. setbacks and all those kinds of things that are of great concern to folks in that area. I think the public consultation part of that should talk a lot about where we don't want that kind of construction to happen. We don't want it to happen typically in Sydenham Ward and some of those areas of the city. But we do recognize the need for it to happen. So to have the public consultation, to have some real conversations about what we want the city to look like, to incorporate that into the central growth plan and the secondary plan that comes from that, seems to me to be the step that we need to take before we decide that we're going to mediate these piecemeal. So although I certainly agree with the notion of mediation, and I certainly agree that something needs to be built here, I think we're putting the cart before the horse, and I think we got to be careful about that. Thank you.
Ms. Agnew.
Thank you. Through you, just a point of clarification for council. The boundary of the central growth infill and intensification study doesn't include the downtown. So that work that's going on as part of that secondary plan involved the lands that were formerly part of the city of Kingston prior to amalgamation, save and except for the downtown area. So that work or that type of contemplation of height, massing isn't being done as part of that planning exercise. What we have before council, we had before council in the summer was recommendations related to retaining Brent Todderan to work with us in building a policy framework related to tall buildings specifically and creating those guidelines in a detailed way for the city of Kingston. So that work is going to be ongoing throughout 2019 and certainly will involve a lot of community conversations to address some of the things I'm hearing tonight from around the horseshoe. But I just wanted to be clear in terms of the intent of the policy work that's been agreed to, what areas of the city they apply to, and specifically how it would relate to the particular matter that's before council related to 223 Princess Street.
Commissioner Hurdle.
Thank you. And I would just like to add through you, Mr. Mayor. So I do appreciate and understand the need to look at policies and have a policy framework before we make decisions. The issue is that we're going to get a number of applications that are going to come in before all of these plans are completed. And obviously we can't say we don't want to make decisions on those, as we know we have a time frame as well to make decisions legally for these different applications. So we know that that's going to happen, although ideally we could stop everything everywhere and finish all the plans that we need to do for years and then reopen the doors. I don't think that's obviously realistic, but the issue that's in front of you tonight is being brought to you not because we're trying to piecemeal this particular project, but because there is a timing issue in terms of the appeal. So the appeal has been filed. There are two actually, but one in particular, there is a timing issue. We wanted to have the conversation with council in open session. As the returning councillors know, typically these types of conversations we would have in closed session when it comes to appeal matters. But because we recognize the need for transparency and openness, and that's what council definitely wants to see more of that. We are bringing this report to you in open session for this conversation. But I just want to point out that's the reason why we're bringing it in the absence of a plan is because of a timing with the appeal.
Okay, next on my list is Councillor McLaren.
Thank you. The report says that they are suing, it looks like they're going to Superior Court with the tribunal, and it also looks like it's Innate that's doing that. Who are the parties that are actually involved in this?
Through your worship, I think to clarify Councillor McLaren's question, the appellant is IN8, and they have filed for a motion for leave to appeal to divisional court, and they have also filed a request for a review or rehearing under the LPAT rules. And they're the party, moving party in both proceedings.
So the applicants are the only party, and it appears that they're going to a court with the LPAT or the OMB. There doesn't seem to be anybody else mentioned here. And you're talking about mediation then with what, 2 groups or 3 groups?
I'm going to ask Mr. Brown to jump in on this, but the party, the moving party is, as you've indicated, the IN8 group is the appellant, And the other parties to the proceeding are also noted, and that being the parties to the original hearing.
So the only parties that can be party to the court appeal and the LPAT appeal are those parties to the original hearing. For mediation on consent, they can open it up to the municipality, which is what we're hopefully trying to achieve, a mediated resolution. So if it goes to mediation, you would have the city and the residents and the applicant around the table.
So just to be clear, you're saying that this movement by the appellant, Innate, is going to call the people the citizens who appealed or who fought at the OMB?
They get notice, correct. They're parties
no,
to
I didn't
the...
ask notice, I saw that.
Yeah.
Are they being called to, and are they being like subpoenaed? Are
No.
they being forced to be there?
No. So what will happen is they have a lawyer, Mr. Donnelly. If Mr. Donnelly and his group want to continue to ensure that their position is put forward, they will have to file materials in response to both the
Sorry, they will
applicant-
have to? Are you saying that there's a legal requirement for them to do that?
There is, and if they don't file that, it'll be unopposed. So at the end, so let's say they didn't file it. If they chose not to file any materials in opposition to the request for leave and the request for rehearing, then the judge and or the tribunal would be rendering a decision without any opposing views. So it's why I said to you before, I wouldn't think they would do that. I would think they would stay active. But if they didn't for some reason and the municipality didn't get involved and the appellant or applicant was successful on any of those matters, they would go back to pursue their 16-story proposal.
Under what rule are they required to do this? You said that they were required, and you're saying that there's a cost that's going to be imposed as a result of this on citizens in Kingston.
Well, they've been funding their own opposition to the development with their lawyer and planners, so they would have to file affidavit materials through their lawyer, and they'd have to get their planners and other consultants to file affidavit materials to respond to what the applicant had filed. So they would have to take an active role if they want to keep pursuing it. And so what your motion before you today says is, we, the municipality, we want to make a decision. We don't want 16 stories, and we want to try and avoid all these other procedures and costly legal proceedings from happening.
Earlier you had mentioned that, or the way you had phrased the things sounded like there was a lot of fear, but my councillor colleague here had mentioned that we have quite a strong case, and it doesn't seem like it's actually needed in that sense. And if that's in fact, the fear that you seem to have put into us seems overrated and incredible, actually. You're actually saying that that the law is going to force people who are trying to do the best thing for Kingston to continue to do this. This is not the system that I understand here.
It's the provincial system. It's under the Planning Act and under the Rules of Civil Procedure. You're entitled as an applicant who has a development application to challenge a decision of a tribunal. So it's not anything that's unusual under the rules, and it's, if you choose to be involved as a party to a proceeding, then you have to become involved or file no materials. So just as they chose to be involved in the appeal and oppose the application, and you're right, they succeeded in that opposition, if they want to challenge the questioning of that decision, they have to continue to be involved. So it's not a fear matter, it's just a fact. Legally, they have to be involved.
But that's only if the tribunal accepts it.
No, so, okay. They file an application to the courts. The courts give you a timeline under the rules of civil procedure where you must file materials. If you don't, then the judge has only your materials in support of your appeal to the courts. So that's the courts. At the tribunal, the same rules. The board will say to you, or the tribunal now, we received a request to review the decision you as a party were involved in, you the Residents Association. They'll send it to their lawyer. Their lawyer then has to respond with materials within a certain amount of time to contradict whatever the appellant is raising as an issue.
That's wonderful. Now, how is that related to the city? We had no position.
Okay, so the city, you're correct. Because the city made no decision, you are not a party to either of those proceedings. So if the residents group continues to be involved, they'll pay that cost through both of those procedures on their own, because they've been doing that. And if they succeed, then the applicant will say, okay, I've got to do something. I'm going to come back the decision said no to my 16-story, so I'm going to come back with something less, because we know they said no. I could keep
Sorry,
my-
they'll come back where? To
the city.
court or to the city?
To the city. Then they're
Through
back
the
to the
regular
city.
planning process.
Correct.
Which is the proper way to do things.
That is the proper way to do it. They started that way. They lost at the tribunal. And so right now, if they lose on both fronts, they come back here. If they win on either of those fronts, they will go back to potentially a new hearing for their 16-story proposal.
And that's where the fear that you're putting in here is, and that seems like a very, very far-fetched possibility.
It's not, sorry, I've done this for 30 years. There's, as I always say to clients, there's winners that are lost and losers that are won. So
how long is the
you try and get a resolution.
So I'm going to step in. I think that, Councillor McLaren, you've asked a question. We've heard a response. So you still have 2.5 minutes on the clock.
Thank you. The fear that's being generated in here, I think, is unfair for us, and it's going to probably influence the vote in the wrong way or in the expensive way. I personally believe that we do have a strong case. We've got no reason to actually be here. It's the appellants who have to do this, not us. If we start to mitigate or negotiate with this, then we are closing the doors to the rest of the community to be involved here, and that goes against open government. So if they succeed, we follow the rules, follow the law, but I don't think we should be encouraging this or taking a position on this, and certainly not making any more expenses on this. So I'm going to be voting against this. It's really unwise. Oh, actually, one other point I want to make. The report says that you even want to mediate based on the peer review. The peer review was written during the old official plan. We have a new one that's been updated. So I submit to you that it's out of date as well. And it's also an opinion in that sense. It's a peer review. We have a judgment from an LPAT that actually says they should have asked for an official plan amendment, and that's what they need to do when they come back. Actually listen to the judgment, because a judgment from a promulgating authority should be and is worth more than a legal opinion. So the fact that this thing doesn't even mention that you're going to consider what the LPAT recommendation or the LPAT's reasoning for declining this is problematic here as well, because you're looking at the wrong document in any case. And I cede my time.
Ms. Agnew.
Thank you, and through you. So just for clarification, the reason that we're here tonight is to make sure that council has the best possible information to understand the options that exist and the complexity of the land use matter that's before you. This is an incredibly challenging situation for this municipality. It's fairly unique in that this municipality hasn't faced something similar before. We retained external legal support related to this discussion tonight to make sure that we had somebody here that has actual experience, that's been through matters where decisions of the board or the LPAT have been appealed through different mechanisms that legally exist for people in Ontario. So these are legal rights that are there. The board decision as well, because we haven't had a decision or a discussion with this council about the decision that was rendered or the order that was rendered by the board related to this hearing. We haven't had a detailed discussion about it. It's very lengthy and it's very complicated and it's nuanced. So we wanted to ensure that relative to this council, you have a good understanding of what the details of the decision are, how they relate to where the appeals are now that have been filed legally by the applicant, where that leaves council relative to its position of non-decision or non-participation going forward in the appeals so that you could make an informed decision.
Okay, thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Bohm.
Thank you, Your Worship. And through you, it was mentioned earlier that basically like we're sort of taking an ad hoc approach on this, and I would say, yeah, we are, and it's based on everything we've just heard that's going to have to continue. This process sort of happened. We're going to have to deal with this one. Going forward in the future, can we do better? I'm sure we can. We're going to have policies. We're going to have lots of conversations that are strategic planning. We can make a better process going forward, but we have to deal with what's before us right now. So One of the reasons I think the city can mediate this is because we weren't a party. Had we been a party, then obviously you're a party, you can't act as mediator. So I'm not 100% sure where I stand on this yet, because there's a few other things to consider. Some of that is the longer we delay a development there, whatever it could be, maybe it's 10 stories, maybe it's 8, the longer we forgo tax dollars and tax revenue there, the longer we don't put people downtown and densify it. So there's a cost to doing nothing, as well as there's a cost to doing something. The other thing is, we all heard it, we've all said it, the vacancy rate in Kingston is not going to change on its own. So we've got to get better at getting things built that can actually have people living in them. So that's something where you have two competing priorities. I understand there's a concern about height, and that's something where we have an opportunity now to come back to the table to bring both parties back. We also heard, if I heard this correctly, that if the community wants to continue to appeal this and be a party to that, they're going to incur more expenses. If the city mediates this, then all of a sudden, it's now the city that will incur those expenses, and that community group is not going to have to basically continue on their own. This will now be a more holistic conversation with the city as a mediator. So a quick question would be, what would be the cost to the city, roughly, and you may not have this, if this all failed and a new application was to come? There'd be a cost, because the city would have to go through all those steps again. Is that a significant cost? Let's say they come back at 14 stories after all this is done, all the appeals and everything have failed.
Commissioner Hurdle?
So through you, Mr. Mayor, I don't, so first of all, I don't have an exact number, but my understanding is your question is, if we go through the mediation process, we retain somebody to support that mediation process and that fails, then there's a new application that comes in. So in terms of the mediation, I think we would know fairly quickly if there's room in terms of negotiation and mediation on the file. I don't think that's something that would take months. But in terms of actual final costs, I do not know what that would be. In terms of filing a new application, so obviously we would go through the same process as we usually go through for all application, which for most of council, you're aware that those types of application would take about a year or so to get through. And then there's always a chance of appeal of that application as well. And then chances are we would be a party to that appeal, assuming that council would make a decision on that particular application, which as a party to the appeal, we would obviously have to incur some substantial costs.
Okay, so just to follow that up, could mediation, if it happened to be proved tonight, end up being the most cost-effective option to the city, to all the taxpayers?
Commissioner Hurdle?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor, we would not be recommending it if we didn't think that it wasn't the most potentially cost-effective and efficient way to try to resolve this matter. We understand that it's not going to be 16-story. We get that. And we understand that there's a need to proceed or an interest to proceed with development on this property. So trying to mediate something in between and along the lines of the peer review, I think, is what we're proposing. And we're trying to do that for the best outcome of the community. Obviously, mediation means that all parties would have to agree to it. So it can't be the city coming in and forcing another party to agree to this. And at the end of the day, I think from a city perspective, we need to try to at least make that conversation happen.
Okay, I just sort of, to frame this up quickly, is basically we have a chance here to now try to mediate this. We're going to get pulled in one way or the other. There is a chance, and however remote it is, there's a chance that if we don't get involved now, that an appeal could succeed. And that could end up, regardless of everything that's happened, as a 16-story building, which would basically undo all the work. You can shake your head and disbelieve that as much as you want, but that is a reality that could happen. So that could undo all the work And then it could be 16 stories, or the appeal could be rejected and thrown out, and they could come back at 14 stories. And we go around and around and around again. So why not try to get the two parties together and come to some sort of compromise? Because we're going to be doing this one way or the other again and again and again. Something's going to happen there. So the other thing that I'm cognizant of at this point is that if we don't get involved at this point, it's going to fall back on the citizens of Kingston that filed the appeal to pay for this to continue. So in my mind, what we've got here is a chance at a compromise. Will there be a cost? Yes. There's going to be a cost to do nothing. So I think that this is a good opportunity before us. I think if not, we're just going to be doing circles continuously on this file. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Deputy Mayor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. First, I just want to say I was really emotional when I saw this item on the agenda, because I thought this had been settled at the LPAT appeal decision in November. It was such an emotional time for all of my constituents and all of us here and everything that happened, and we're not going to rehash it, but we know a lot of stuff went down. And then I see this, and I agree. It is staff's sincere attempt to try to steer us in a direction of the least harm. I understand that. I see this all the time at the hospital. You have to choose sometimes between two very potent forms of suffering that your patient goes through, but one of them you have to recommend, and they're both bad. Well, in this case, though, let's not lose sight of the forest for the trees. We face the people. We go door to door, the 13 of us. We go door to door, and we hear what they have to say. And they need clarity. Everybody needs clarity. The official plan on paper in general, if you read the Municipal Act and everything else, and the Planning Act, the official plan should be a helpful tool. When we brought it into the city before most of us were here, it looked very optimistic. It was going to be a helpful tool. Its purpose was to bring clarity to the process, to reduce this kind of squabbling over each ad hoc decision that gets appealed and then reappealed. This kind of thing, it's everybody's worst nightmare, and it's very emotional. And the way out is what Councillor Kiley was saying. We need more clarity. And so, yes, there will be a delay before some of the secondary plans are done. And yes, we might need another official plan update. In the meantime, what do we do? That's what this question is. What do we do? The suggestion from staff is that we get some more expensive lawyers and we mediate, which is what they've recommended in other ways, and we know how that goes down amongst members of the public. They do not like it. When we do that, they don't like it. So why would we do it? What they like is the public process. They can speak to us. They can tell us what they think. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. In this case, they won. And we're going to go and say, well, not so fast. We're going to mediate. I don't think politically that's a very good idea at all. And that's, of course, your supporters, and the way that you got elected was by saying that you were going to push as hard as you could to get things built, regardless of whether there was a public process or not. And I understand in some residents of Kingston, that's a very appealing thing to say, and maybe some of you got elected that way, and if you so, go ahead and vote for the recommendation. I did not get elected that way. I got elected by listening to my constituents, and I'm 100% certain that the majority, I had 65% of the vote share, the majority of the residents of Sydenham do not want mediation on this important downtown place. They do want something built. And the way that you do it, so with ad hoc, we need to be firm, not conciliatory. We need to be firm with ad hoc. We're stuck doing ad hoc. We still need to be firm. I disagree with staff on this. We need to show leadership. We need to say no to this. We need to respect the LPAT decision, and the applicants need to resubmit their planning documents for a much more appropriate thing, which is what we were all telling them during the process, and they ignored us because they wanted to play high-stakes poker. Well, this is what happens. You come back in the planning process, you follow the rules, and you submit something that is conforming with the official plan. If we don't hold firm, our official plan is worth nothing. This was a constant theme throughout the election. I'm very confident that this recommendation should fail. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor, would you take the chair?
Gladly. You probably want to have something to say. You've got the chair. The floor.
Thank you. So I rarely do this, but I will remind council that there was one individual around this table that canvassed and spoke to residents in every single district. And that was me. And I'm going to tell you what the general message that I got was. And it may not be what you think. It was basically a cry for compromise. This issue has been the most divisive issue that I have seen around this table, certainly in the last term of council. It polarized our community. There were thousands of people on one side and thousands of people on the other side. And what I heard was, this is my view, but it's really a shame that there's this giant gulf. On the one hand, thousands of people wanting an 8-story building and thousands of others wanting a 16-story building. There's like 8 stories in the middle. And yet, polarized, unable to have a conversation to try to bring together. So, when I saw this staff recommendation, I'll be honest with you, my first reaction to it was actually, could this be an opportunity for us as a new council to try to kind of bridge the gap between these two polarized camps? Now, based on the discussion that I've seen over the last hour, that clearly has not happened. And that is disappointing, but it is what it is. My personal feeling is that mediation is not a path forward. I have a letter from Mr. Donnelly that was addressed to me that said very clearly that there is one party that is not interested in mediation. So in some ways, I think that this discussion is a bit of a moot point. Personally, I'm quite happy with what people have suggested, is that we can go through the planning process again and that there could be something else that's brought forward. But I am just going to try to manage people's expectations. My feeling is that we're probably going to be talking something between 8 and 16. So, in my view, this is really just an opportunity for council to send a signal. Do we want to send a signal that even though we're 99.9% sure that mediation is not going to proceed here? Or do we want to just send a signal to say that we want to find some middle ground on this issue? That's all. So that's really the only reason why I'm going to support this. Not because I think that this is actually going to be a path that's going to succeed, and not because of my prior position on this particular application. Right? I've heard a lot of people on this. I honestly believe that the best thing for the community is to try to move forward in a way that brings together rather than pulls apart. Now, I understand some people say that by voting for this, in favor of this, you're actually taking the more divisive issue. I just simply disagree with that. I think that whenever you use the word mediation, that to me is all about trying to bring people together. At the end of the day, it's probably not going to work. But at least it allows us politically as a council, with no official position on this development, to say we'd rather move towards the middle ground. That's the only reason why I'm going to support this. At the end of the day, regardless of what happens here, I think that that's the direction that we're moving. I appreciate the comments about wanting to have a holistic discussion, which we need to have, on design and location of taller buildings. But in the meantime, there are other applications that are going to come forward. Let's just try to signal that ultimately we're looking for a compromise. Let's not have another 4 years of battling this out where it's a zero-sum game and half the community's on one side and half on the other. Let's try to take a step tonight where we can actually try to bring people together. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship, and you can have the chair back.
Thank you. Next on my list is Councillor Doherty.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. I I do want to refer to the letter that you just mentioned from the Donnelly Law Firm. In that letter, and I just want to read one sentence, it says, "We are authorized to advise you our clients will not accept an invitation to undo the November 9, 2018 Local Planning Appeals Tribunal decision." And the "not accept" is underlined. So I would like to ask about that, what approach we would take. But if they hold to this, if the group that Donnelly Law Firm is representing, if they hold on to not accepting an invitation, how will that affect the residents of the community that are behind this position? They have already won, and all of a sudden, will they be in a position of, well, now they don't look like they're open for mediation and discussion? Where I believe in the letter it was also mentioned that they had, earlier in the process, asked for mediation, and that was not accepted from the other side. So now I feel like we're putting this group into a pretty difficult position because it may not make them look good. So I just wonder what.
Mr. Brown?
So two things. Number one, your report is not asking for council to authorize supporting an appeal of the decision or to support overturning the decision in any way. Your actual recommendation is to only be involved in mediation to try and get a mediated resolution at a lowered height, which actually pays respect to the decision saying 16 is too high. And on the second question of the residents, no party can be forced into mediation. So if the direction is to try and seek out mediation with all parties, and after they hear that you're not trying to undo the decision, you're trying to get a mediated resolution at something lower than 16, and that doesn't undo the decision, it only can move forward if they agree and it's consensual. That's how mediation takes place. It's, in essence, council trying to say, we'd like to help everybody resolve the issue at a lower height, not to undo the decision.
Okay, Councillor Doherty, you still have the floor. Is there anything else that you want to say? Okay. Okay, next on my list is Councillor Hutchison.
Thank you, Worship. I think we got to some aspect to this, but I'll just reprise. Just to make it clear, has the developer requested mediation?
Mr. Brown.
The developer has reviewed the developer first sought the appeals, and then when they got your report, they sent in a letter saying we would support going to mediation. So this is the first time that they've agreed to go to mediation.
So they have requested mediation at this time?
No, they've agreed to go to mediation, but it has to be agreed to by all parties. So the request hasn't gone to the board to mediate because council has not taken a position yet as to whether you would be doing that as well.
Mr. Brown, just to clarify Councillor Hutchison's question, because I think it is a good one. Yeah. Did the applicant request mediation? So in other words, is what's before us based on a request from the applicant?
Through your worship, I can advise that the applicant has not requested us for mediation. It's the city who's put forward this proposal.
Councillor Hutchison.
Okay, that was a bit confusing, I think you'll admit. Okay, so the developer has not requested mediation. You have to be clear about this. It's not a question of the citizens not wanting to do it just by themselves. The developer hasn't requested it either. In fact, they've done something completely different. They've gone to the divisional court to ask for leave to appeal. Okay?
Commissioner, just to clarify, Commissioner Hurdle?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So the city staff report is not based on the applicant requesting mediation. You're correct, the applicant did file 2 appeals. Yeah, Having said that, the applicant, since the report has been published, and it's been available to everybody in the public, the applicant has submitted a letter to the city indicating that they would be willing to work with all parties to try to reach a solution through mediation.
Okay,
so I just interrupted just so everyone was clear around the table. Councillor Hutchison.
The point is that at this moment in time, the developer is seeking to have the decision of the tribunal overturned. He's looking to have leave to appeal. And the reason he has to do that is because usually tribunal/OMB decisions are final. So what the odds are of them even getting to the point of appeal is, well, as the solicitor over here said, it's hard to tell, right? But it's not clear. They're not appealing. They're asking to be allowed to appeal, a completely different thing. So they've written this letter, which we just heard about now, and then the citizens are not interested this time in mediation, as their letter says. And the reason is they won, right? They went to the tribunal and they won. So, and what's important here is to understand what were they arguing for. They were defending the official plan and the bylaw. Okay? When I went door to door, people were shocked, even if they were sort of pro something being developed on this property, when you tell them it's not in line with the official plan and it's not in line with the bylaw, their attitude changes. And because they think we went through all this process, we set up the official plan, we consulted, we agreed on certain things, and now when it applies, in this particular case, it's going out the window. People don't understand that kind of process at all. I'm not saying it isn't done in municipalities all the time. It is, and it has been centered out by researchers as one of the biggest problems in Ontario land development. Now, the peer review is the basis for this mediation, but the peer review is actually not acceptable to the citizens. Why? Because it says low teens. Their position is defending the bylaw and the official plan, which allowed, as you heard, for about 8 stories. So why would they enter a process of mediation that undermines their own position? Just by saying yes means now you're waffling. Nobody in their right mind who has already won is going to accept that. Okay, and the second thing that's really important here is they see the city as not being impartial. True, we didn't have standing, but equally true is that staff put forward a report supporting 16 stories, right? We all know that, especially the ones that are sitting around here. So that means, and they were brought in, we didn't take standing, which was good because of the tie loss vote, but the developer knew they could call on city staff to testify in a way that was beneficial to the developer, not the citizens. Okay, so why would the citizens accept such a situation? It doesn't suit their position at all. So I think the mayor was getting at this whole discussion is, in my view, premature. Okay? It's premature. They're going to divisional court. They're going to win or they're going to lose. And then, the whole cycle, as Councillor Bone said, will start all over. But nothing to do with the city. It's got to do with the process that's beyond us now. I'm almost done. I'm almost done. So what I would suggest, vote no. Okay? Vote no and wait for the parties to come to us after we find out how the appeal process goes. Then we might be in more of a position, people might be more open to things. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sanik.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Hutchinson just had so many of my points. I won't be supporting the recommendation. The mayor was absolutely right in how he said that the height of the Capitol condo has been so polarizing. And because of that, I am totally happy that the matter's before the courts and let it stay before the courts. Where Councillor Hutchison was just talking about how probably mediation never would have worked anyway, notwithstanding getting the letter last night that said that they don't want to become a party, which has made tonight's discussion almost moot. But if we didn't get that letter, going into the mediation and that the peer review was going to be supporting, like option 3, 13 stories. I just can't see that the citizens group representing by Donnelly Law would accept 13 stories. I think the only chance mediation would have been able to get to maybe would be 10 or 11 stories, more along the lane of the height of Anna Lane condominium, just a little bit above the official plan. That to me would be the only way mediation could work. With, it being mediated at 13 stories, if this recommendation approved, it's going to cost the city so much money in mediation. Already tonight is costing money by the hour. And I believe that any attempt at mediation is just going to leave all the parties miserable and grumpy. And I don't want that. Let the height be decided by the courts. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that has not spoken that wishes to speak? Okay, we will call the vote then on Clause 1. Please vote. And that loses by a vote of 2 to 11. Okay, on to report number 11 from Planning Committee. Who has the report from Planning Committee? Looking for the report from Planning Committee. Councillor Neal.
My apologies. I was sidetracked. I'd love to give report number 11 from the Planning Committee, duly moved and seconded.
Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Kiley, that report number 11 from the Planning Committee be received and adopted.
So there's just the one clause, approval of an application for zoning bylaw amendment, 930 Woodbine Road. We'll call the vote, please. And that carries. Okay, nothing from Committee of the Whole. So we will move to information reports. If you have any questions, just raise your hand as I read through them. So number 1, community indicators. Yes, Councillor Hutchison.
Sorry, quickly. The Community Foundation has its own indicators. Are we going to be asking groups like that to adopt common indicators? That seemed to be where we're going. I just want to be clear about this, because they've done some good work in this area.
Commissioner Hurdle?
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So the community indicators that are in front of council tonight are not, we're not asking council to approve the indicators because they're community-based. So we can't impose on United Way and Community Foundation and everybody else what indicators they should be using. The community indicators that are being presented to you have been agreed upon by all these organizations, including the Community Foundation, who has been at the table as part of the steering committee. They do have indicators that are very focused in some areas. So for example, they don't necessarily look as much as these indicators do in terms of the environment. So the Community Foundation tends to look more at vulnerable population and really zero in on that and get into a lot more detail than these community indicators do. We have much broader indicators. That's why we had organizations like KEDCO at the table, the police at the table, etc. So they're not the same, but the Community Foundation does feed into the indicators that are in front of you tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Number 2, update on community greenhouse gas emissions 2017 reporting year. Councillor Kiley.
Thank you, Mayor Patterson. Through you to Commissioner Kidd. I just wanted to follow up on comments made about the FCM grant. We have some money remaining from that for purchasing of electric vehicles, but the provincial top-up didn't come through because that program was canceled. Is there any way that we could work with other municipalities who also received the FCM grant and find some type of purchasing power, working with them, or if there's like a deal for bulk buying that could happen?
This kid?
Through you, Your Worship, the FCM grant that we were awarded, Councillor, was very specific to funding. I'm trying to go from memory, and perhaps Mr. Hugenboss can correct me, or Mr. Desjardins if he's still here, but I think it was very specific to funding some charging infrastructure and a portion of a bus. So I don't believe that there's any way at this point that we can join it with other communities, but we're continuing to have dialogue with the FCM staff to see if there's a way that we can do something still to be able to utilize those funds to a green initiative. The second piece of that answer that I would give is as far as sort of joint buying power and finding economies of scale through that. Kingston Transit's buses are all purchased through a consortium that is managed by Metrolinx. And so we have been for probably the past 10 years purchasing all of our buses through that procurement process.
Thank you.
Thank you. Number 3, electric vehicle strategy update. Councillor Hutchison. Okay, so back to update on community greenhouse gas emissions. Councillor Hutchison.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to say that a couple of things and ask a couple of questions. One of my observations about this report is that there's certain possible correlations, I won't even call them that. They have to do with the larger sectors of consumption of energy and the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions. And I was wondering, I think my question is pretty broad. So it was, do we have a plan to help reduce these larger sectors of consumption and emissions? Mainly, the ICI sector, the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector, and transportation. Now, as a corporate entity, the city is making some really great initiatives, right, and doing some really good things. The problem for us is as a community, and whether we have a way of intervening in processes so that we can actually reduce greenhouse gases, especially in those sectors. Like, they make up the vast majority of energy consumption and emissions. So, there he is. So, I'm just wondering, and in that, I have a secondary question which may help Mr. McClatchy respond, is there any correlation between the sectors most responsible for any energy consumption and emissions and what I call the source elements, which are gas and natural gas? Like, they're in the figures 1 and 2.
Mr. McClatchy.
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. Implementation of our climate action plan. The portion of that is focusing on the transportation sector, I'll start with that. The transportation sector, the carbon footprint associated with that is almost a large majority of that is gasoline. Our investment in electric vehicle infrastructure is targeted directly at that wedge of the carbon pie. With respect to the IC&I sector, that's where our work with Sustainable Kingston's Green Economy program is targeted. We're specifically targeting their program at the IC&I sector in Kingston. So that's a sector that their Green Economy program is particularly good at reaching because it creates a framework that appeals to businesses and institutions like that.
Is that Green Economy initiative big enough to make a significant progress on cutting greenhouse gases?
They have 31 members, as we heard tonight. They've accounted for 21,000 and change tons of greenhouse gas reduction. So Admittedly, that's a relatively small amount, but it is a growing, they do have a trend of growing that. And I'm happy with that. I'm also happy with ideas, that could help us expedite that as well.
Well, I'm happy that we've made some progress. It's more progress than we've made through Sustainable Kingston in years, but I think it's clearly not enough. And so when we get to strategic planning, I think we better be thinking about that. Without a sustainable environment.
I'm giving you a little bit of leeway, but it's questions only for information reports. So.
Oh, okay, sure.
Okay.
So I think we have to ask ourselves the question that.
No. I'm not going to let you get away with that one.
But
that was a good try, but no. No. Do you have another question for staff? You know what? There's going to be, okay, just questions. I am going to be strict on this because I hold everybody else to the same standard. So questions only.
Okay.
There will be times where we'll have, policies and items that will come and will allow you to say what you want to say, but I just don't think this is just questions only, please.
Questions only. Okay. Yeah. All right. Trying to think how to say this. Who was at the Sustainable Kingston Environment Conference last week and heard the environmental commissioner say that things are worse than we even think? That's my one question. My next question is...
That's not a question.
Yes, it is. I asked who was there.
No. Okay, let's not be so, question of staff.
Okay, it's just an extremely important issue, okay?
I'm not disputing that.
Okay.
But you can do that with any information report and go on and on.
Okay,
so I'm just saying, I'm not trying to dispute, to cut you off, but questions only.
Okay. I don't have any more questions.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, number 3, electric vehicle strategy update. Number 4, 2018 municipal election accessibility plan. Yes, Deputy Mayor Stroud.
Believe it or not, I have a question about this report. And I guess it's Mr. Clerk because it's the elections, so it's your department. So this report is based on something that went through the Accessory Advisory Committee about, by accessible, we're talking about people with disabilities needing to access the elections. That's the kind of accessibility that's talking about. What about, are we going to get a different report that speaks about general accessibility? Because in this report it talks about the location of the polls, and for example, Countryside had 3 polls. I did not know that. Most of us only had 2, and then we had advanced polls as well. In Sydenham, the 2 polls were within 2 blocks of each other, and more than half of the district geographically did not have access to a poll within walking distance. To me, that's an accessibility concern, but that's not addressed by this report. What will we be getting to address those concerns?
Mr. Clerk?
Thank you for that question, Councillor. The Clerk's Department, through the election, incorporated a number of new initiatives for the past election, including the free transit and the different types of voting opportunities. What we propose to do going forward is take a look at the comments that we received and the feedback that we received to improve the experience for both the candidate as well as the elector. Taking a look at initiatives that may include voting anywhere in the city, which should help to allow for people to be able to vote, to get the voter turnout up. But this report, to be quite frank, is a specific requirement for us under the Municipal Elections Act to bring the report forward to council within 90 days, which we're doing. And what we've tried to do is provide the comments that we receive both from the public and the staff with respect to our initiatives related to accessibility. It is both broad and it is also narrow in vision as well. There isn't a further report that's coming per se if the idea was that we're going to come forward with an additional report. This is, as I said, a report that's required under the Act, and we hope to incorporate future initiatives going forward. The transit was something that worked out really well this year, and we hope to utilize that for upcoming elections as well.
Okay, so just to be clear, there is another report coming, but there's nothing specifically that would address walkability to the polls, or whether we are looking at having polls distributed through the city and being able to vote everywhere, so that everything is there's a walkability radius that you can use. But I was wondering if that is going to be part of the report.
So thank you for that question. Perhaps you misunderstood what I said. There is not a further report coming forward with respect to the election. We have done what we said we would do in working with the Municipal Accessibility Advisory Committee and other stakeholders. This is a report that closes off that aspect of the 2018 election. And as you can see throughout the report, it talks about initiatives on a go-forward basis. So there is not a further report that deals with the accessibility.
I'm going to ask a different question, and if it may not be you that answers it, but the Accessibility Advisory Committee, and I know we've got a member here that is on that, is this something that would be in order to discuss at that committee, the distance from poles from the various residential areas?
Through your worship, we are always more than willing to discuss accessibility with the Municipal Accessibility Advisory Committee. Yes.
Okay, moving on, number 5. Yes, Councillor Carley.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. On page 104, it mentions a problem with internet voting, and the polls were extended in that capacity for about an hour. Will there be a future report on that specifically?
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you for that question. The short answer is no.
All right. Would you be able to talk a bit about the delays and potentially any lessons learned from that experience?
Mr. Clerk.
Once again, thank you for that question. The City of Kingston made its own decision, a Made in Kingston solution with respect to what happened during the internet voting opportunity. It was delayed for an hour and 15 minutes, so I made the decision to extend it by an hour and 15 minutes, which I thought was fair. And I also allowed that to happen at the polls, so we kept the polls open an extra hour and 15 minutes. It had an issue with our provider, through Dominion, which we believe have dealt with the issue going forward, but the council committee can rest assured that we will not fall into that situation going forward. We will be tendering that particular, or RFPing that particular aspect going forward. But it was something that happened with our vendor, and we dealt with it. Other municipalities extended it by a day, many, many hours. We did what we thought was reasonable. We had the results that evening, and all in all, I thought the election went really well. So it just gives me a chance to thank the Deputy City Clerk who actually ran the election for me, so everybody would know who was the point person in the election. Thank you.
Your comments are agreeable. Thank you.
Councillor Doherty.
I heard from a few residents in my district that there used to be in past elections some voting stations in senior apartments or apartments that had large numbers of seniors, and that we didn't have that this election. Can you comment on that, please?
So thank you for that question as well. We had 17 or 18 seniors residences where we had specific voting stations for those residents. There's a formula within the Municipal Elections Act that talks about having polls within those particular locations, and we complied with the legislation. We did not allow for members outside of the different facilities to come in. It is the residents' homes. So if we have deviated from that, it's only because the number of beds and the legislation has impacted on that. But every 4 years, we make that determination based on the previous locations, and we run it through the formula and the legislation. So if something didn't go to that particular station or that particular location, it's only because it didn't meet the definitions within the Act.
Councillor Hill.
Well, one question that came up for me was around the use of secondary high schools in order to accommodate polling stations. that a lot of seniors seem to be quite intimidated to go onto a secondary school site for that sort of, for voting, and that parking was difficult, always difficult. But just, I think, largely the number of kids and, a lot of seniors just felt uncomfortable, I think, with that venue. I wonder if we could, or if you've given any thought to looking at whether or not secondary schools are an appropriate venue for voting.
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. We look at all the different facilities based on a criterion that takes into account a lot of the accessibility features that we would like to see in those particular locations. The secondary school locations offer us a larger avenue through the gymnasiums and whatnot to be able to have the election run a little more smoother. I can tell you that we will be working with both boards of education to see whether we can schedule a holiday on voting day 4 years from now that'll eliminate some of the other underlying issues that we have in place with respect to adults and children and parking and things of that nature. But we review all our locations every election to make sure that we have the right ones. And as I said, or I touched on briefly before, we may be looking at vote anywhere in the city, which will change the dynamics of the different locations that we'll be using, because we may not need as many locations, and we may move away from the schools at the same time.
Councillor Holt.
Thank you, Your Worship. I noticed that the survey didn't, or I guess the question is whether this question was on the survey, but there doesn't seem to be any feedback on the issue regarding the lack of voter cards that were distributed, it seemed, in apartment buildings, very dense buildings in various parts of the city. So I'm just curious if that was something that came up, because the location and the building and the knowledge of where to vote were all the factors that sort of played out together.
Thank you for that question. We were aware of that situation, and we took steps to try to deal with those issues effectively. One thing to always keep in mind is that the information that the City Clerk's Department uses for the voter notification cards come from MPAC. So we're working and trying to work closer with MPAC to ensure that the information is as accurate as possible. And we're also going to be taking a look at all new development as well to ensure that the apartment buildings and other locations are within that particular district so that they can vote at the proper location. But as I said before, if we are able to do a vote anywhere system, that should help eliminate that. You know, we would hope that all the eligible electors receive voter notification cards. We've got boxes of them downstairs, to be quite blunt with you, that have been returned. So I think the important thing is to work closer with MPAC to ensure that that voters list is as accurate as possible, and that'll make our election a little more cost effective as well with respect to that circulation.
Okay, so we've got a lot of questions. So it's 10:47, so I need a motion to extend the meeting, please. Can I have a mover? Moved by Councillor Osterhoff, seconded by Councillor Osanek, to extend the meeting to finish the agenda. Okay. Please vote.
We're still waiting for one, please. Could everybody please revote? We're still waiting for one.
And that carries by a vote of 12-1. Okay, so I saw another hand for a question for, yes, Councillor Chappelle.
You brought up my favorite four-letter word, MPAC. So my question to you is it possible that going into the next election, since MPAC has a great ability to say that we give you 80% accuracy in your voters list, that we retain our 20% or we pay MPAC the year going into the election equivalent to the accuracy of the voters list?
Mr. Clerk.
I'm sure we can bring that up in our discussions, whether it's that black and white. I don't believe it is. There is something that has to happen with that voters list, because it's not just in Kingston, it's in other municipalities, and it's other forms of elections as well, whether it be federal or provincial. But we will be having a very spirited discussion with MPAC shortly.
Okay. Moving on, number 5, tender. Oh, Councilor Neal, did you have a question to number 5? Tender and contract awards subject to the established criteria for delegation of authority for the month of November 2018. Councilor Neal.
Thank you very much. This is going to be a lesson for Councillor Hutchison. I'm going to ask 2 rhetorical questions to the Commissioner, if I can. First of all, the neighborhood public meeting on the 7 Right Crescent negotiation, is it right that that's happening at 6:30 tomorrow at LCVI in the cafeteria?
That has nothing to do with the established criteria for delegation of authority.
Oh, I apologize. I jumped ahead to number 6.
Okay.
It's
So
been a long night.
Okay, so let's hold that question. So number 6, update on 7 Right Crescent negotiations. So let's replay that question about a public information meeting coming up.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Hurdle.
Yes, thank you, and through you, the answer is yes, that's correct, Councillor Neal.
Thank you. And as I'm hopeful and I understand, the community issues regarding height and density are likely to be addressed and resolved tomorrow.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. So I do have to say that the issue around that the community brought forward in terms of their concerns and the conversation we had around height and density, we are bringing something forward to the community that we believe generally meet the intent, but I do have to say to council, this will be an application that you will have to go through and that will be outside of the zoning. So it will be one of the many to come through the 4-year term, and that we won't have the perfect plan in place to address it. So I just wanted to flag that, because even though the community might be comfortable, generally speaking, what's being proposed, it still has to go through an amendment.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I know I should just be patient, given that this is coming to us quite soon, but I'm curious, I'm going to push my luck here. The report suggests that, it talks about the potential for a partnership with a nonprofit. And this, when we last saw, I think when we saw this motion, in June, it seemed as though that was a preferred route, given the history of CJM and its lack of, the original proposal was not feasible for a number of reasons to do with what was deemed to be, that it wasn't cost effective for CJM to build the number of affordable units that we were looking for. So my question is about whether or not, at this point, we can find out if there is a nonprofit involved.
Commissioner Hurdle.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, there is a non-for-profit involved, and the benefit as well of the non-for-profit is not just the number of units, but it's also the long-term affordability of the units. So we have agreements, as you know, with the private sector in terms of affordable units, but they're typically based on a 20-year term, which means after that term expires, they can be returned back to market, and most do tend to do that. With the non-for-profit organization, the intent was to make sure that we could have those affordable housing units for a longer period of time, and typically they're permanently affordable.
Okay, number 7, Juniper Cafe lease update. Deputy Mayor Stroud.
Thank you, Your Worship. Juniper Cafe is in Sydenham, so I do have a couple questions for Mr. Hugenboss, who's been handling this. Just to let council know, you probably received a bunch of emails on the subject. I've received over 100. So the report says there's been a negotiated settlement. There's been a lease extension, I believe, for 3 months. And so my first question for Mr. Hugenboss is regarding what was said in the original letter from one of the owners of the Juniper about there being an RFP in progress, which had a timeline, and there was a couple of applicants, and there was a rumor started about surrounding the applicants. What actually can you tell us happened with the RFP process surrounding the replacement operator, the process that had been started by the TET board for the replacement operator for the cafe space?
Mr. Hugenboss.
Yes, the TEP board was working with the current tenant, Juniper Cafe, in looking to offer a short-term extension to their lease and to allow them to negotiate a purchaser, recognizing the fact that the lease was expiring. So the plan was, if that couldn't get done, that an RFP would be released. And as noted in the report, the RFP was held off from being released in order to facilitate negotiations. And then also, once it was released, it was also indicated by the board to the Juniper Cafe owners that they could potentially halt the RFP process in order to continue negotiations. This was back in the fall and near the end of the year of the previous year in 2018. Eventually, it came to a point where the TET had to go fully forward with the RFP. The RFP was posted after an expression of interest period, attracted 2 potential proponents. Those proponents had taken the RFP and were in the process. A third proponent did ask to be involved based on a potential purchase of the Juniper, which was permitted, and then later withdrew from the process. So the original 2 were still there. That process has now been halted by the TET board based on the information in the report and the work that we've done together as a city and the TET board. There have been no submissions by those proponents. Some questions were put in through the RFP process, but the RFP is similar wording to the city standard RFP, which does allow for cancellation, postponement, and all those types of things. So that's where we're at, or where the TEP board is at. The RFP has been suspended, and those proponents have been notified of that.
Okay, so the explanation for what was in the letter is that it had started and there were 2 parties had come forward, but they never finished their submissions, and therefore there's no cost to them or to the city to cancel the RFP for now. Looking to the future, so say we're back here in May after the 3-month period, there's 2 possible outcomes, I suppose, at this point. One is that they do find a seller like they've been seeking all this time that would presumably continue the Juniper pretty much identical to its current setup, or they fail to find a buyer, and then we would be going along the lines of what happened before, another RFP started by the TET Board of Management and pretty much identical to the one that just got suspended, but at a later timeline. Is that correct?
Yes, it is possible that nothing can materialize out of what's presented in the report. There is risk there that the negotiations and the agreements cannot get done, and an option would be for the board to restart the current RFP process, the suspended one right now, or start a new one, or go a different route. What I can say is, talking to all parties involved as recently as this afternoon, that the city and the owners of the Juniper Cafe and the TEP board are fully committed to working on this solution. There is a timeline. There are clear expectations. The new lease, potentially with a new buyer, would be based on the criteria laid out in the RFP, which was decided by the board based on what the the TET facility as a community arts hub requires in a cafe space, which the Juniper Cafe has done very well at providing that service to the community and catering to events and attracting events at the TET facility. So it's definitely a unified approach to continuing to grow that beautiful building in the quality arts community arts hub programming that it provides. And that's, I can assure you, discussing with all parties, that the focus is on the 3 months timeline to get done what is outlined in the report.
Okay. So, and I've already talked to other councillors about this. Could it be necessary in the future? Because one of the elements of the difficulties or the difficult challenge that the Juniper had meeting expectations all along was that the rent was set as a sort of a market rent based on two estimates, one on behalf of the tenant, one behalf of the board, I take it, and they agreed on a fair rent based on the market rent. Would the city have any leeway in the future to possibly give a more attractive rent as a means of helping the cafe operator be more profitable, and so that they may want to stay for a longer time?
Mr. Kumbas?
Through you. Excuse me. Yes, you're correct. The rent was provided an opinion. There are two opinions from local commercial realtors, one representing, if you will, the current Juniper Cafe owners, and the city helped out with the board to seek an alternative opinion. Those opinions were done at the same time based on the identical information provided by the TEP board and the cafe operator based on all the criteria that's set out in the lease. And both opinions from both sides of the parties came in within about 10% value, and both parties readily agreed that it was fair to take the average of both of those. So that was done with the consent of the current operators, and this is really within approximately the last 14 months. So I don't expect there to be any considerable change in those opinions based on the intended lease going forward, which is based on almost identically the same criteria that is in the current lease right now. So I don't see there a reason for a substantial change in the lease rate, because based on commercial realtor opinions locally in this business, they were quite aligned in their approach, and the cafe owners, the city, as well as the TET all agreed that it was fair and reasonable.
Thank you. And Commissioner Hurdle, I'd like you to just please pass on my thanks on behalf of the residents of Sydenham to all your staff that worked hard on this file. Thank you.
Okay, next on my list is Councillor Neal.
Yes, very quickly. It's my opinion that the board, TEP board, does an excellent job managing all of the artists and artisans that are part of that community. Is it accurate that it's the only commercial leasee on city property that I'm aware of that the lease isn't managed by the city? Is that accurate? And could that be a consideration going forward, that the city would manage any commercial lease on that property?
Through you, I would, off the top of my head, it's likely correct, but I don't want, there are a wide variety of leases in a wide variety of city facilities, but at this late hour, I think that's likely correct, certainly of this commercial magnitude. So that said, I think there's definitely a possibility that there should be a consideration for the city to take more of a lead role. There is an opportunity coming up in the next few months where staff will be coming back to council regarding changes to the master lease between the city as the owner and landlord of the facility and the TEP board as the city's tenant who operates the facility. And like the councillor said, it is a a terrific facility with great programming, a wide variety of community arts programming, and reaches out to wide variety of users and interested parties. And they do an excellent job of that. And I think there is definitely a possibility where the city can take a lead role in the commercial leasing aspects, not taking away from the fact that, as I said earlier, the cafe is not just a standalone cafe that you walk down the street and can go in. There is a lot of that, but it's integral to the facility operations of how the user groups in the facility book events and require catering, which again has the Juniper historically has provided very good food and service in that regard. So that's a certain thing where city staff are likely not best to take over the operations of booking events and making sure all those things are coordinated. But of course, the things I've been mentioning today about lease negotiations, fair market value rent, and tenant improvements, landlord improvements makes a lot of sense based on the city's experience in those.
Thank you.
Councillor Sanik. Okay. Thank you. No information reports from members of council. Miscellaneous business. We have a few motions. Number one, that the resignation of Martha Bailey from Heritage Kingston be received with regret. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Sanik, seconded by Councillor Hill. Please vote. And that carries. Number two, that the resignation of Kayla Dedinger from Heritage Kingston be received with regret. Can I have a mover, please? Moved by Councillor Doherty, seconded by Councillor Neal. Please vote. And that carries. Number three, that Mike Buderick be confirmed as the Loyalist Township Representative for the Taxi Commission. A mover, moved by Councillor Hill, seconded by Councillor Doherty. Please vote. And that carries. Number four, that notwithstanding section 3.1.3, subsection 3 of the flag display policy, council approved the raising of the Bell Let's Talk flag on January 30th, 2019 in Confederation Park, as requested by Sandy McDonald, Regional Director of Community Affairs, Bell. Moved by Councillor Rusanik, seconded by Councillor Hutchison. Please vote. And that carries. Okay, there is one new motion. The deputy mayor is not. Oh, am I missing something? Oh, there is a fifth. Thank you. That's on the other addeds. My mistake. Sorry. Number 5, that as requested by Alex Krestonik, Education and Outreach Team Member of the National Eating Disorder Information Center, council proclaimed the week of February 1st to February 7th, 2019 as Eating Disorder Awareness Week in the City of Kingston. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Osanik.
I would just let members of council know that although it says it's a motion to amend, that this will be for miscellaneous business 5. I just don't have that vote in my system.
Okay. Everyone clear? So we'll call the vote then on miscellaneous business item 5. Please vote. And that carries. Okay, there is one new motion. I'll hand it over to the Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. This is new motion number 1. It's moved by Mayor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Bohm. I'll read it now. Whereas Section 9.1 of Bylaw number 2010-1, Council Procedural Bylaw, as amended, states that meetings of council are held at City Hall in the council chambers at 216 Ontario Street unless otherwise decided by resolution of council.
And whereas in keeping with the City of Kingston's open government initiatives, it is desirable to engage the public and provide community outreach by relocating periodically to an off-site functional meeting space. Therefore, be it resolved that Council waive bylaw number 2010-1 as amended in order to hold the Council strategic planning sessions on Tuesday, March 26th, Wednesday, March 27th, and Thursday, March 28th, and Wednesday, April 17th, 2019, commencing at 6 p.m. in room 312, Goods Hall, Queen's School of Business, Queen's University, 143 Union Street, Kingston, Ontario, and a special council meeting with respect to council education related to municipal demographics, growth plan, and corporate strategic studies to be held on Wednesday, February 20th, 2019, commencing at 6 p.m. at the St. Lawrence College Conference Centre, ground floor, 100 Portsmouth Avenue, Kingston, Ontario. Your Worship, you have the floor.
Thank you. I'll be fairly brief. This is just laying out a, yes, given the time, that this is really just to approve a location change for a couple of key meetings that we have coming up. And I say that for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think that there is value in going out into the community and holding meetings, and it just adds to our accessibility. But the other thing that I will say is this, that there is a level of formality in this room that I think works most of the time, to be honest, because a lot of the times it's black and white, it's voting yes or no. But a lot of these meetings here are really geared to facilitation, discussion, and being able to step a little bit out of the formality into more an informal, almost working as a team and kind of building some of the plans that we have going forward. And so, to be honest, being in a different room, in a different setting, is actually really handy for that. Having gone through it before, it really does change the dynamic. So that's effectively why this motion is here, and so certainly I'd ask for council support. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Councillor Bowman, will you take the chair? I just have a brief comment.
Yes, Deputy Mayor Stroud, and I recognize you.
Thank you. Just because it mentions the whereas clause that this is essentially for open government because we have this open government priority. And I just want to point out that to me, when I think of open government, it's not the reasons that you just mentioned, which are valid reasons, and I agree with them. It's more transparency in the way that decisions are made. So the location of the meeting doesn't necessarily lead to open government. It's more that the decisions that we make are done in the open, and the reasons for them are clear, and the documents that relate to them are accessible to the public, that kind of thing. That's what is what I think of by open government. That being said, I'm very happy to support this motion. Thank you.
All right, I'll return the chair.
Thank you. And does anyone else wish to speak? No? Yes, Your Worship, you have the last word.
Thank you. I think I'll just respond to the last comment was made. I agree. I think open government has many different spectrums, and so this is really more just about accessibility, and again, for the reasons that I said earlier about why we want to change the look and feel and location of council meetings. I completely agree. I think that that's why we had a discussion earlier this evening in open session that, quite honestly, in the past probably would have happened behind closed doors. And I think it was good that we did it the way we did. So with that, happy to see this move forward. Thank you.
Okay, and I will call the vote on motion number 1. Please vote. And that passes unanimously, and I return the chair.
Thank you very much. We have no other new motions. Are there any notices of motion? Yes, Councillor Doherty.
I do have a notice of motion, and I know it's late, so I'm going to read it really quickly. It's regarding Bill 66, and it'll be moved by me and seconded by Councillor Neal. Whereas Bill 66, Restoring Ontario's Competitive Act, is currently under consideration by the Legislative Assembly of Ontario. Whereas Schedule 10 of Bill 66 amends the Planning Act to add a new Section 34.1, which allows local municipalities to pass open for business bylaws with approval in writing by the minister. Whereas the open for business bylaw would override critical legal requirements to protect water, natural heritage, farmland, and human health. Whereas these bylaws would take precedence over municipal official plans. Whereas no public notice or hearing is required prior to passing an open for business planning bylaw. Whereas development approval by the minister under the open for business bylaw will not be subject to site plan control application, and there will be no option to appeal to the local planning appeal tribunal. Therefore, let it be resolved, if Bill 66 becomes law, that this council will only submit for approval under Schedule 10 developments that pose no risk to the environment and have full support from the public. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Clerk, ask for minutes, please.
Moved by Councillor Osanek, seconded by Councillor Holland, that the minutes of City Council meeting number 2019-04, held Tuesday, January 8th, 2009, Tuesday, January 8th, and Wednesday, January 9th, 2019, be confirmed.
Please vote. And that carries. We have some tabling of documents, a number of communications. Is there any other business? Mr. Clerk, call for bylaws, please.
Moved by Councillor Osterhoff, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that bylaws 1 and 3 through 5 be given their first and second reading.
Please vote. And that carries.
Moved by Councillor Osterhoff, seconded by Councillor Doherty, that bylaws 2 through 5 be given their third reading.
Please vote. And that carries. Motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Councillor Neal, seconded by Councillor Chappelle. Please vote. And we are adjourned. Thank you very much.